This happened to me when I was working at McDonald's. My boss assigned a schedule amongst our staff. I was unfortunately scheduled for the night shift on Fridays. I didn't usually mind as we didn't get a whole lot of business around this time of night. My boss was pretty laid back and didn't mind if I went on my phone during business hours, so long as I got all my work done. I remember dozing off repeatedly due to the fact that I wasn't fully acclimated with the night shift hours. Psst. That's when I heard someone making a psst sound, the kind of sound you make when you try to draw someone's attention. I notice a customer trying to make an order outside, so I quickly greet them with my usual, "Hi, welcome to McDonald's, may I take your order?" I then heard a man say, "One Whopper, please." "Yes, I would like one Whopper, please." I couldn't tell if he was being a smartass or not, so I ended up saying, "This isn't Burger King, sir. We don't serve that here." I heard him chuckling profusely after I said that. I quickly checked the security camera, only to see a clown. The clown was standing in front of the drive-thru menu without a car. It's not Halloween, why the hell is this guy dressed up like that? I really didn't want to serve this guy, so I decided to use our company policy as a plausible excuse for him to exit the premises. "Hi sir, unfortunately you need to be in a vehicle in order to purchase something here." "If you don't have a Whopper, I'll take a Baconator instead." I now could tell this guy was some random psycho harassing me. I instinctively yelled, "Get the hell out of here before I call the cops!" I cautiously stick my head out the window, only to see the clown no longer there. A couple hours later, near the end of my shift, I notify my boss and fellow employees regarding the situation. They all dismiss my accusations by saying ignorant things like, "Did you get his autograph?" Or, "It was probably some guy that thought it was Halloween." I annoyingly pretend to be amused and head home. The following Friday, it was my time to work the night shift again. I really dreaded working this shift, especially after what transpired that day. I tried to convince myself that it would be highly unlikely that I'd encounter that clown again. As time went on, I remember dozing off as I get startled by another psst sound. I urgently check the security camera but don't see anyone present. At this point, I genuinely thought I was hearing things due to my subconscious mind thinking about the clown. My paranoia must have been at the peak of its height. That's when I turn my head towards the drive-thru window, only to see the clown staring dead at me. "If you don't make me a Big Mac, I will kill you. Trevor." My heart sank to my stomach. The clown knew my name. I immediately grabbed my cell phone to call the cops, but my hands were trembling so much that I actually wasn't capable of dialing anything. The clown started banging his head on the glass while screaming my name, Trevor, repeatedly. "Trevor, Trevor, Trevor, I am not loving it! Trevor, 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 Trevor!" I see blood dripping down from his head. I started shouting from the top of my lungs, "Leave me alone or I will call the cops!" The clown runs away as another car approaches the drive-thru lot. I stupidly resume work and wait for my boss to come in. Upon his arrival, I explain the entire situation to him. He then dismisses me by saying, "Don't sweat it, kid. It was probably some drunk. You can go home now." As he was talking, I noticed a cut on his forehead. I could even see blood start to drip from it. No. It can't be. "Goodbye, Trevor." No! I was a full-time employee at Burger King and had worked a monotonous 10-hour shift every day. The quality of my life wasn't the greatest, as the countless hours of work were starting to become more and more strenuous. I desperately needed money, as I wanted to move out of my grandfather's house and into a residence of my own. My grandfather took the responsibility of taking care of me since I was an infant, due to the tragic loss of my parents. My mother and father had suffered a fatal car crash which granted my grandfather full custody of me. I began comprehending the news as I got older, but oddly enough wasn't too affected by it, as he fit the bill of being the best caretaker that a kid could ever ask for. Playing duck hunt was one of my favorite things to do whenever I wasn't so busy at work. My grandfather didn't own any consoles that you would usually see in today's modern day, just the old school Nintendo with the classic gun controller. Hey, Grandpa.
Don't worry about me, son. Pay attention to the game and get that birdie. That's it, Larry. Now go on. Shoot the birdie. Now!
Besides entertaining Grandpa with my spectacular duck hunt skills, I was usually serving customers at the drive-thru of Burger King. I always switched back and forth from the kitchen to providing customer service at the front counter. Our location wasn't usually as busy as most Burger King branches, as we were located by the corner of a quiet residential area, and there weren't many teenagers or kids around. Mostly just an older crowd that were either retired or just big fans of our adversary, McDonald's. Working at Burger King for a long duration of my postgraduate time off made me familiarized with the regulars who would come to dine in. I was usually scheduled for the night shift, so the difference in crowd was pretty evident, as our venue always seemed to attract homeless people or loiterers around this time. Then there was this one guy who would always arrive around 9 p.m. every evening dressed as a Burger King mascot. It was pretty evident this guy was either some crazy lunatic or just a really huge Burger King fan who wanted to look the part. I always got a few laughs and giggles every time I saw him, as the mock-up of the Burger King mascot was pretty accurate but at the same time outlandish. As impressive as his getup was, I was more intrigued by the absurd orders he usually requested. I remember him approaching the front counter as I said, "Hi sir, welcome to Burger King. May I take your order?" The mascot then said,
Give me 30 Whoppers.
"Sir, are you sure you want 30 Whoppers?"
I said 30 Whoppers! Make Whoppers now!
Okay, sir, just the sandwiches, or would you like to make it a combo?
Have it your way.
The mascot then placed about $150 on the counter and began walking towards the seating area. I recall him sitting in one of the booths as the employees in the back began preparing the 30 Whoppers. About 10 minutes later, I bring the stack of Whoppers on a tray towards the mascot's table and notice he had his cell phone held up by a salt shaker with the video camera recording. I placed the tray down and casually walked back behind the front counter. I then saw the mascot completely demolish the Whoppers one by one. It appeared he was either filming a mukbang or just had a preposterous craving for Whoppers. I recall seeing the mascot eat a total of around 10 Whoppers out of the bunch and then pass out from the inevitable itis while drooling on the furniture. The time was around 12 a.m., which was when our restaurant closed for in-dining service, and also when it was the end of my shift. I knew in the back of my head that I had to politely escort the man out, so I slowly approach him as I see him snoring heavily. I gently tap his shoulder and say, "Hello, sir. I unfortunately need to ask you to leave as we're closing."
Give me Whopper. Give me Whopper. Give me Whopper.
Sir, I'm politely asking you to leave.
Make me Whopper, then I leave.
Sir, we can't do that. You need to leave now. I firmly secure my stance with an assertive poker face, while trying not to show any signs that I was nervous as hell. The mascot then gets up and walks out of the restaurant. Calling an Uber was completely necessary, as I wanted to avoid potentially being seen by that weirdo on the street or public transit. The time was roughly 1 a.m. when I made it home and immediately got in the shower. My paranoia began setting in, as all I could hear was weird noises coming from outside my shower curtain. Grandpa, is that you? That's when I heard the same Burger King mascot voice from earlier saying,
Open the door.
"What the hell? How'd you get inside my house?"
Open the door! Open the door! Open the door! Get the hell out of here! Fine, have it your way.
That's when the man grabbed a hold of the door hinges and repeatedly slammed his head against the door.
Get the hell out of my house or I'm calling the cops!
As the mascot continued slamming his head, I remembered my grandpa secretly keeping one of his handguns stashed in the bathroom cabinets. I took it out and pointed it towards the door as I said, "Please, please don't make me do this. Please just go. I have a lot to live for."
Here's Johnny!
The mascot successfully plummets his head through the door. Just then, I see my grandpa standing next to me. I shout, "Grandpa, help me!"
That's it, Larry. Now go on. Shoot the birdie. Now!
I pulled the trigger and said, "Look, Grandpa, I did it! I killed the birdie! Aren't you proud of your grandson? I still got it, don't I?"
I'm Yasmin Gagne.
I'm Josh Christensen.
And this is Most Innovative Companies.
This story occurred around the early 2000s, back when I was still in elementary school. I was in my early teens, so the monotonous school life was something I always dreaded. My mom always picked me up from school as her workplace was just down the street, so getting a ride was always less strenuous than walking home. She would usually stop by our local McDonald's just before heading home, as she didn't really prepare home-cooked meals due to the exhaustion of being a single mother. As much as I adored my mom, the lack of home-cooked meals and abundance of McDonald's all
6 years ago, I worked as a delivery driver for Domino's. For me, it was a pretty easy job to just drive around town delivering pizzas, plus I made some pretty good tips. I lived in the city, so I would never have to drive all that far. This was also my main way of earning extra money during my summers home from college, and I would generally work some pretty late nights. One night, I remember that it was a Friday, which are always really busy. I was driving all over the place around town for hours, until finally it started to quiet down after midnight. At about 1 o'clock in the morning, we got another order for a delivery that I took. It was 1 cheese pizza and an order of cheesy bread, and I put it in my car and started driving. Once I got closer to the location, I realized that it was not for a house, but a business. It was still in the city, but a more industrial side of town where there appeared to be a bunch of warehouses. I arrived at the address and saw that the special instructions on the order said that they wanted it delivered to the back door in the alley. I drove around back to find a dark alley with some dumpsters and then a small set of concrete stairs that seemed to lead to the building. I drove around back to find a dark alley with some dumpsters and then a small set of concrete stairs that led to a back door of the building. I'm not going to lie, it was a creepy scene with no other cars or people there in a back alley in the middle of the night. I had a job to do though, and I got out of my car and walked up the steps to the back door. I knocked on the door and waited there for a minute, but nobody answered. It was extremely quiet, and nobody else seemed to be around at all. I was beginning to wonder if I was at the correct building, so I looked around for the address to make sure. But just then, I heard a noise come from about 10 feet away from me. I looked and saw a man come from behind a dumpster that was sitting on the other side of the stairs that I was on. He was wearing sunglasses even though it was night, and started walking towards me. Based on the way he was walking, it didn't seem good, and I backed away from my car. Then, I saw another man come out from behind the other side of my car. He was also in sunglasses, but other than that, I couldn't really give a good description. They both were coming towards me at a pretty fast-paced walk. I knew I wouldn't be able to get to my car, so I jumped over the railing of the stairs to the ground below, which was only about 5 feet. I then ran out of the alley as fast as I could. I could hear the men chasing after me as I did, and it sounded like there was a third person among them running as well. I was somehow able to outrun them to the end of the alley, and once I was there, I turned for the street and tried to run to an area where there was more people. I panicked and ran into the middle of the road, where a car was coming and started honking at me. I got out of the way just in time, and was lucky enough to get to the other side of the street. The men stopped from chasing me and were still at the other side. From there, I called my boss and told him what happened. I made my way to a nearby convenience store and waited. It ended up being a big deal, as the building that I was instructed to deliver the pizza to had not actually ordered the pizza, meaning whoever lured me there was possibly setting me up to get robbed or something like that. The police were called, and I quit the job shortly after. This happened about a year ago. It was a Friday night, and I was hanging out with my girlfriend at her place, and we were trying to decide what movie we were going to watch. We ordered Domino's, some pasta and a pepperoni pizza, and I offered to go pick it up. There was a Domino's roughly 5 minutes away, so it wasn't a big deal for me to drive over and get it, and then I wouldn't have to spend money on a tip. When the food said it was done, I got in my car and left. I got to the small restaurant, which by this time was roughly 11 p.m. and was pretty quiet. I parked in the small parking lot beside the restaurant and walked inside. There was nobody at the counter as I walked in, so I stood there and waited. After a few seconds, I saw a woman briefly come out from the kitchen area and said she would be right with me in a moment. Then she disappeared again away from the counter. I said that was fine, and I stood there waiting. I looked around the small lobby. I wasn't in a big hurry or anything, so I didn't mind, and I knew that it being a Friday night, they were probably really busy with deliveries. Then, as I looked behind me at the window going outside, I saw a man who had his face pressed up against the glass window of the store, looking right at me. He had a scraggly beard and appeared to be in his 30s. He was just staring at me with a somewhat angry look on his face. I didn't know what to do, and I was expecting him to come inside the store, but he never did. I faced the counter and then looked over my shoulder again to see that he was still there and not moving. Finally, the woman came back and asked me for my name of the order. As she did, she seemed to see the man in the window and asked who he was. I said I didn't know, and I found it strange. She kind of laughed it off with a nervous and awkward laugh. Then I told her my name, and she said she would go get my order. As she was getting it, I could see movement out of the corner of my eye. I saw the man suddenly dart away from the window and run away. I figured he was just some crazy guy, and I was glad that he was gone. A minute or so later, the woman came back with my order, and I took the boxes and left Domino's. I walked to the parking lot on the side where my car was, and saw that the weird guy from the window was now standing by my car. I felt really awkward now because this man seemed to be a little crazy, and I knew I'd have to walk right past him. I was also concerned with him being right next to my car. I slowly walked over, and the man looked at me and smiled as I did. He didn't come closer to me though, which was a relief. Eventually, I was able to make it to my driver's door and get inside. I said goodnight to the man and drove away. He just stood there smiling at me. I began driving the 5-minute or so drive back home, but as I pulled onto a busier road less than a mile later, my car suddenly didn't feel right. The front wheel seemed like it was coming right off. I stopped the car on the side of the road and got out. I walked over and looked to see that all the lug nuts on my right front wheel were loosened almost all the way, and the wheel of the car was starting to come off. I couldn't believe it. I immediately thought back to the man. I was kind of more out in the middle of nowhere now and was driving away from the businesses in town. I got out my phone and quickly called my girlfriend. I got back inside my car then and waited for her. Luckily, she could come and pick me up with her car, and she arrived just a couple of short minutes later, and we went over to get a wrench. We were gone for only about 10 minutes, but when we got back, my driver's window was smashed. At that point, we called the police. They came out to the area and we told them the whole story. I believe that man I saw was trying to hurt me, and he returned to my car and smashed the window after he realized I was gone. I'm grateful that I narrowly missed him. A few years ago, I worked at Domino's Pizza. I worked there for roughly 1 year, and for the most part, I liked it. One time, though, I was working a night shift like I often did. It was sort of busy, and we would typically get a lot of phone calls for pizza orders, and I would answer them a lot of the times. On this night, we got another phone call at about 10 p.m. I answered it, but on the other end, I didn't hear anything at all. I said hello several times, but there was just silence. Just as I was about to hang up the phone, I heard on the other end a loud and really creepy sounding laugh. I said hello one more time, and when I did, the laugh only seemed to get louder. It gave me the creeps and I hung up on them. I kept working and answered several more calls over the next few hours, until after midnight I got another call which was the same creepy laugh. I asked who it was, but of course they didn't answer. This time, I kept them on for a little bit longer, but all they would do is laugh. Eventually, I hung up on them again, and that was the last call I got that night. Over the next few days, though, it started happening more often. It happened about 5 times, and I told my coworkers about it. They hadn't experienced anything like it, and it would only seem to happen when I answered the phone. I was starting to get really annoyed and also seriously creeped out by these calls that kept happening. The person on the other end of the phone was usually laughing, but sometimes there would be a whisper which I couldn't make out what they were saying. Then they started just doing other random things like not talking at all or hanging up right away. I figured it was just a stupid prank, but I couldn't help but be a little bit scared. Then things got even worse. One night, when I was at home, I received a call, and when I answered it, I heard that same creepy laughing. I had no idea how they got my number, because it had only happened at work. I asked who it was once again, but all I heard was the same old laughing. Then they started whispering once again, and I couldn't make it out at all. Eventually, they hung up on me. I was really creeped out now, and didn't know what to do.
Grainger knows that if you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, you go to...
I was home by myself, so that made me worry even more. I ended up calling my best friend and telling her all about it. She came over that night, but there were no more calls. The next night, I got the last call that I ever received from that person. It was more hysterical laughing, and it got louder and louder, until finally, there was a scream at the other end of the phone, and they hung up. This time, I was the most creeped out that I had ever been, and once again, my best friend came over. She spent the next few nights at my place. However, that was the last call that I ever got from the number, and they never called me again at work or at home. I sometimes wonder who it was and why they were calling me. I go to Taco Bell all the time. Most of the time that I go, it's during the late nights. I'm a senior in college, and I'm always busy with work and school. For the last few years, I've often drove to the Taco Bell drive-thru after long nights of work or studying. One night, about 2 months ago now, I was really hungry at about 11:30 p.m. when I got done with work. I drove to the nearest Taco Bell, which was about 10 minutes away, and pulled into the drive-thru. This particular Taco Bell location was open until midnight every night of the week, but it recently had been closing early on some nights because they had been short in employees. As I pulled into the drive-thru without really thinking, I noticed nobody else was in the drive-thru and the lights to the restaurant seemed to be off. I knew they closed the lobby of the restaurant earlier than the drive-thru, so I wasn't really sure if they were still open or not. I drove to the speaker and rolled down my window. I didn't hear anybody on the other side, and there was a few seconds of silence. I said, "Hey, are you guys still open?" and waited for a response. Several seconds more went by, and still there was nothing. I knew at this point they must have been closed, and I started to roll up my window when I heard something from the other end. There was a man's voice speaking, but I couldn't understand anything that he said. It sounded like when you have your mouth way too close to the phone, and you can't understand any of the words. I asked him to repeat what they had said, but there was once again no response. This time, I decided to just drive away and go somewhere else. I pulled slowly through the rest of the drive-thru. As I got to the first drive-thru window, I could see that there was nobody there and the lights inside were off. Then I saw the second window, and the lights were off as well, but there appeared to be a man in the window looking at me. As I passed by the window, I watched him quickly duck down as if he didn't want me to notice him. It was strange, but another thing struck me as being even more weird. The man was wearing what appeared to be a clown mask covering his entire head. I drove over to a nearby gas station and got food there instead. The next night, I found myself in a similar situation of getting off work later at night and was once again really craving Taco Bell. It was only 10:30 this time though, so I decided to go back and see if they were open. When I arrived, I could see there were several cars in the drive-thru already, and so I pulled in. They were in fact open, and I was waiting in the line until it was my turn. I ordered, and when I got to the window to pay, I asked if they had changed their hours. The woman working told me no, they had not changed their hours, and they had just closed at 9 the previous night due to a short staff. I mentioned how I had seen a man inside the window with a clown mask on at almost midnight, and the woman seemed surprised. She told me she had closed the place herself and left at 9 o'clock, and when she did, nobody else was there. When I drove home that night, I couldn't help but wonder who it was that I had seen the night before in the window. I used to work at Taco Bell in the past. I worked at a Taco Bell that was about 15 minutes away from my parents' house. I worked there for a few years from my senior year of high school through my first 2 years of college. I liked the job a lot and made lots of friends. But with working late nights, I would occasionally see some weird things. But the strangest thing to ever happen was my last year working there. The Taco Bell location that I worked at was open until 3 a.m., and I would often be closing as I was on this particular night. I worked mostly just during the summer, so I didn't mind it too much. There was just the two of us working at the time. We usually didn't get too many customers this late, unless it was a weekend, and being a Thursday night, it was pretty dead for the last couple of hours. At about 2:55 a.m., literally right before we were about to close it down and go home, I saw a car pull into the drive-thru. As we were still open for 5 more minutes technically, I decided to not tell them that we were closed and take one last order. I spoke to the driver and asked what his order would be. I waited for a response for a while, but there was none. As I looked at the camera at the car, it appeared to still have the window rolled up. I waited a little while longer and was starting to get really annoyed because I wanted to go home, and now I had to wait for this person to order. Finally, I saw the driver's window roll down, but it looked like there was nobody inside the car at all. The driver's seat was just empty. Nobody was in the passenger seat either, and I was really confused. I decided to say to the driver that we would be closing, and if they wanted to order anything, they would have to do it right now. I didn't get any response. Instead, after about 10 or 15 seconds, the car just drove forward slowly ahead. I was so confused as to what was going on. How was the car driving if there was nobody in the driver's seat? I shook my head and then told Damien that they didn't order anything, so we could close it up. Just then, we heard the sound of knocking coming from the drive-thru window. It was 3 loud and solid knocks. I walked over to the window and saw that the same car had stopped at it. I opened up the window and looked out, but saw that there was nobody in the car once again. The front window was down, and there was nobody in the driver's seat or the passenger. I thought it had to somehow be a prank. I stuck my head out of the window to get a better look inside the car and saw that there was nobody in the back seats as well. My jaw dropped and I couldn't believe what was going on. I got a creepy feeling and stuck my head back inside and closed the drive-thru window. I then watched as the car drove away. Damien and I were both extremely puzzled by this. We closed up after that and both went home. I don't remember anything else as strange ever happening. This story happened about 5 years ago. I was on a road trip with my friend Anna. We had been driving all day, and late at night we both got really hungry. By this time it was nearly midnight, so as I drove, Anna looked on her phone for places nearby that were open. We were kind of in the middle of nowhere and unfamiliar with the area. As we drove on the freeway, it was pretty much just fields on both sides. Anna was saying that her phone was really slow and she wasn't really getting a signal out here. We kept on driving for about 20 more minutes until we finally saw an exit sign with several food places on it. We pulled off the exit and quickly saw that the only places that seemed to be open were a gas station and a little Taco Bell. There were several other buildings in the small town, but all of their lights were off. We first stopped for some gas and then pulled into the Taco Bell drive-thru. We got to the speaker to place our order, and as I was beginning to talk, I heard what sounded like a scream coming in the background. It sounded like someone was screaming help, but it abruptly got cut off. After a few seconds of silence, a man's voice came back on to say that they were closed. Anna and I both found this very bizarre, and we had a strange feeling about it, so we decided to go inside the restaurant. We went to the door and saw that according to their hours, they were still open. When we tried the door, it was unlocked, but nobody seemed to be inside. The place was very quiet. I walked over to the counter and stood there. I thought I heard someone talking from the back, but I couldn't see them. Finally, a man walked to the front of the counter, and told me that they were closed. He wasn't wearing a Taco Bell uniform though, and didn't seem friendly at all. I mentioned that the hours on the door said they were still open, and the man just shook his head and said that it was wrong. He started to walk away when I mentioned the screaming I had heard and asked if everything was all right. The man paused for a second and then smiled a little and stated that it was just another employee joking around. He then asked us to leave. As we turned to walk back out, I once again heard another scream. This one was very loud and I could clearly hear someone screaming for help. The man then shouted at us to get out in a very loud and angry voice. We both ran out, but as soon as we had gotten outside, we decided to call the police. I just wasn't believing that those screams were a joke, and the man definitely seemed to be hiding something. We waited in our car in the parking lot for a couple of minutes until the police showed up. They went inside, and it wasn't long until we saw them leaving with the man we had seen. Later on, it was explained to us that there had been 2 employees working when a man came in and attempted to rob the restaurant. One of the workers struggled with him and was knocked unconscious, and the other employee was taken to the back of the restaurant when we pulled into the drive-thru. I'm glad we showed up when we did, or the man may have gotten away with it.
I'm a 20-something guy living in the middle of Tennessee. Before this bizarre experience, I'd been going to college full-time to be a paralegal. One day, though, my mother broke her hip after falling down the stairs. She was 52 at the time, and my dad had passed a long time ago, so it was on me to take care of her. We didn't really have anyone else. I was forced to make myself a part-time student, because I would have to get a job to help her afford some of her medical bills. At the time, thanks to my late dad, I had a fairly new car, and I figured it'd be fun and easy to deliver pizza. I loved to drive. Where I lived, there was a lot of scenery, and sometimes I even went on drives just for the sake of it. As you can probably guess, it was easy to get the job. I just applied at a few local places and called each of them the next day. Before I knew it, I was delivering pizzas wearing a Domino's hat. Delivering pizza wasn't hard. I can be completely honest with you about that. But delivering can be insanely stressful. You've got to get there at a reasonable time. You keep hoping that the order was made correctly, because you can't just send it back to the kitchen when you're miles away from the restaurant. And last but not least, you find yourself praying that your next customer isn't a prank or a complete jerk. I can't tell you how many jerks I've delivered to. Jerks who didn't want to pay because I wasn't able to give them one more pack of Parmesan cheese. Well, there came a day when I had to deliver a large pizza to an address I did not recognize. The place was about 10 miles away from the restaurant in an area we all infamously called the Boondocks. It was an area that I'd personally never been to, but when I saw it on my drive, I would describe it as a country region of town where there's only a single trashy house every 5 minutes on the road. And I'm not trying to be rude. These places looked beat up, old, and ransacked. It was honestly hard to believe that people still lived in those places. I was fully expecting at any moment to witness a drug deal, or to have someone step out in front of my car to stop me and try to sell me meth. Needless to say, it was a bit of a creepy place. Given that it was getting dark out fast, I was ready to get the delivery over with. I arrived at the customer's address rather quickly, thank God. Luckily, this house was far cleaner than all the ones previous. It was a small white home with a short paved driveway and a seemingly untouched screen door in the front. The yard was well kept and clean, and the grass looked to have been cut recently. Also, there were no cars in the driveway, but I still assumed someone was home to pick up the order. I got out hesitantly and I grabbed the pizza. The carrier was still hot enough to burn my skin if I held it in one spot for too long. This was good. It was probably our most common complaint we got, that our pizzas were too cold or not hot enough when we dropped them off. so that was one thing I didn't have to worry about. With some flimsy confidence, I began to walk up to the screen door. When I was nearly at the porch, I could now see a faint light through the front window, and that's when I saw the silhouette of someone looking out at me. Someone standing there, watching me walk up to their door. Good, I thought. This will be quick. I made it to the front door, cleared my throat for whatever reason, opened the screen door, then knocked on the wooden door. With the first knock, the door slid open. The door hadn't been closed at all, so when I knocked, it opened further. But I swear, there's no way it should have opened that much from a single light knock, because the door, in a matter of seconds, was wide open. I could now see inside. I could see the faint lighting from what appeared to be 2 dim lamps in the living room. I could also see a small, maybe 28-inch TV in the living room, displaying a silent, flat blue screen. For several seconds, I didn't realize that I was holding my breath. I could feel goosebumps coming up on my forearms. What in the world was going on here? Hello? I said. It definitely wasn't loud enough to get anyone's attention, though. So instead, without stepping through the doorway, I knocked on the open door, hoping to let someone know that I was here. I waited for at least 2 minutes, but I didn't hear a soul. Nobody walking or talking in the house. No sign that anyone lived there. I stood there, frozen and silent, trying to listen. "Behind you," a voice whispered. I felt breath on the back of my neck, cold, chilling breath. Immediately, I spun around. I did it so quickly that I dropped the pizza inside its carrier, but I didn't care. I ran back to my car and was ready to peel out of there. But I made the mistake of looking back at that dang house. I saw it in the window. The silhouette of a person standing there, still watching me. Except now, they were waving. I hauled tail out of there. When I made it back to the restaurant, I was written up for failure to deliver and for losing my pizza carrier. I thought I was going to be fired, to be honest with you.
There's more to love with YouTube Music Premium. Listen to ad-free songs and discover new podcasts anytime, anywhere. Try 1 month free.
But I think my manager just went easy on me, as she knew the situation with my mother. On one of my rare days off, one of the days I didn't have to work or take care of my mom or go to school, I went back to that strange neighborhood. I found that house again, but it took me a while to be sure that the place I was looking at was really the same place. Because even though it had been about 2 weeks since the incident, the place was a wreck. The screen door was hanging off of its hinges with holes in the screen. The white paint on the outside was now an off-white or nearly yellow, with patches of chipped paint, and the lawn was now a jungle with random auto parts scattered about. I gathered my courage and drove back to the nearest neighbor I could find. I knocked on their door and excused my intrusion. Then I asked them if they knew anything about the strange house. To my surprise, they did. The house was the home of an old man who struggled with his drinking. Apparently, he drove his kids away from frequent abuse, and once those kids left his life for good, he took a shotgun and ended his own life. I was covered with chills as I listened to the story. It was like some sort of ghost story you'd see on TV or hear from an urban legend, but this was real. I'd lived through it. After the man told me that that house hadn't had electricity on for the past year, I thanked him for the information and I bid him good day. I stopped delivering for Domino's after that. I didn't feel like delivering to any more strange places, and I got a better job offer as a manager at a local Subway. Still, sometimes I get a chill on the back of my neck, and I can't help but think about that voice saying, "Behind you."
My name is Kenneth. I'm 22 years old, and this story happened a couple of months ago. I had just gotten a job working nights at an Amazon warehouse near where I live. On my shifts, there weren't that many of us. It would just be me on my own doing my work somewhere in the warehouse. I think it was my second night at work when the security guard who worked there introduced himself. His name was Vincent. He was a large man, slightly overweight, in his late 30s. He was friendly at first when we started talking. Mostly small talk and interests we both have. He asked if I wanted to go get a beer and maybe see a movie the following Friday, as we both had that day off. I agreed as I didn't have any plans and I don't go out too often. That Friday in the evening, me and Vincent met up at a bar near where we worked. Everything went okay. We had some drinks, talked about sports and previous jobs we worked. Then we headed out to the movie theater. That's when Vincent started acting weird. We bought our tickets and headed to the theater. I needed to use the bathroom, so I went. I was standing at the urinal doing my thing when I heard a bathroom door open. I couldn't hear any footsteps, but I didn't think twice about it. Then I turned around. I saw Vincent standing there watching me. His head was down, but his eyes were up, and he was just smiling at me. I jumped and I laughed, saying he startled me. But Vincent just stood there looking at me. It was like he was angry almost, with a weird smile. It's weird, you would have to be there to understand. I just walked past him and said I would wait for him outside. That was the first red flag. Then as we were in the movie theater watching the movie, I swear he was staring at me. I wasn't certain, but I could see in the corner of my eye that he was turned staring directly at me. I was too freaked out to check, so I did my best to focus on the movie. The next thing that happened was Vincent started rubbing his hand on my thigh. That was it for me. I got up and I walked out. The next week at work, Vincent came up to me and asked if I wanted to go hang out. I looked at him confused and annoyed at the same time. I thought me up and leaving was obvious. I wasn't interested and don't want anything to do with him. I told him no, I'm busy, and carried on working. Fast forward a few weeks later of him asking me and hanging out and texting me, calling me. I really had enough. So the next time I saw him in work, I told him I don't want anything to do with him and to leave me alone. I turned away and carried on sorting boxes. Vincent walked away and I thought that was the end of it. Boy, was I wrong. Later that night, I decided to take a break and go to the bathroom. I sat inside one of the stalls to answer a few texts. I then heard some heavy boots stumping down the corridor, then into the bathroom. I opened the stall door to see what was going on. Before I could open the door, it was kicked into me, causing me to fall backwards, and then Vincent was on top of me, putting his hands all over my face, trying to cover my mouth, and then he started strangling me. I was losing consciousness, but I still remember the look of Vincent's face as he was choking me. His face was red and his eyes were wide as they could be. I thought I was going to die, but for some reason Vincent let me go and left the bathroom. I sat up trying to catch my breath. I was still in defense mode because I thought for some reason Vincent was going to come back and kill me, but he never did, thankfully. I reported what happened to the manager. He looked on the CCTV camera and I called the police. You can see me walking into the bathroom, and about a minute later Vincent rushes in. At that point, Vincent had left the warehouse and went home. Well, that's what he told the police anyway. I'm going to fast forward what happens next and say due to no proof of Vincent attacking me, the charges were dropped against him. He even got to keep his job. I felt that justice had been taken away from me, and there was no way I was going to continue at Amazon, especially with that maniac still working there. I left that job, obviously, and currently have a new job. I hope and pray for whoever comes into Vincent's path, stay away from him.
I live in a small studio apartment. I like my place a lot, even though it has some details that always made me really nervous living here. The wall facing the street is basically just a giant window, and I also live on the second floor, so my window is very close to the streets below. The marquee looks very easily climbable and gives direct access to my window. Even though that makes me a little uncomfortable, nothing really ever happened, and it just stopped bothering me a couple of months after I moved in. That is, until last week. Last Monday, I woke up at around 2 a.m. to go get some water to drink. Since the kitchen is right next to the side of my front door, I could hear something coming from the corridor as I filled up a cup. It wasn't coming from another apartment or from the streets. The noise had that very specific reverberation from an empty corridor. I approached the door and could make out that the sound was actually some kind of trap beat playing on repeat. At first, I thought maybe that was just some drunk guy messing around with his phone before getting to his apartment. But after laying in bed again, I could still faintly hear the same beat coming from the corridor. It kept playing and playing until I fell asleep about an hour later. 7 a.m. rolls around and I'm woken up by someone ringing the doorbell. It was a cop. A bunch of them, actually. The landlord and some of my neighbors were also there. Even with the place really crowded, it was really hard to miss the trail of blood that went from the corridor window to the far end of the wall. The cops said that someone was leaving for work early in the morning when they came across the blood smears and then immediately called the police. He questioned me and the neighbors. The place was scrubbed and we went on with our lives, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every single day I always come home and walk over where the blood was, and I always wonder what the heck happened in the corridor that night. Now, I was a little bit uncomfortable living here before, but now I'm definitely really spooked out. I wonder if I'll ever figure out what happened. When I was in college, I lived in apartments that weren't on campus but still called student housing. I saw this guy around that I thought was pretty cute. His name was Kiefer. He knocked on my door one day and he said he was the maintenance man and that he needed to change our AC filters. I was making dinner for my roommate at the time and for myself, and he commented that it smelled really good, so I invited him in to stay for dinner. All went pretty normal as we watched a movie afterwards, totally innocent. At about midnight or so, I kept telling him that I was really tired, trying to hint for him to leave. My roommate had already gone to bed, so it was just him and me now. After telling him to leave because I was going to bed, he kept trying to talk me out of it, saying that I should stay up longer. He just kept taking forever, trying to drag it out. When he was putting on his shoes, he then started crying that he had a cramp in both of his calves. He told me that he couldn't walk upstairs and that he didn't know what to do. I really wanted to go knock on his door to have his roommate come and get him, but I'm in a wheelchair and I couldn't go upstairs. We had an extra bedroom in our apartment that only had a bed in it and nothing else. He continued asking if he could sleep in the room and I kept telling him no. We argued for like 10 minutes about allowing him to sleep in the extra bedroom. I was so freaking exhausted, I just went ahead and decided to let him. I locked my roommate's door and my door so that he at least couldn't come into our rooms. When I woke up the next morning, luckily he was gone and nothing was stolen. I honestly should have reported it to the apartment complex, but I wasn't really thinking. A couple of days later, I heard someone knock on my bedroom window in the middle of the night, and I totally flipped out about it. It ended up being Kiefer, but obviously I didn't let him in. Then the next night, my roommate and I were in the living room, and then he came and knocked on our door. Ashley, my roommate, answered it, and he asked for me, and she said that I was asleep already. His response?
No, I know she's not asleep. I look inside y'all's window, so I know she's awake.
Yeah, Kiefer was definitely a creep. So, for some backstory, I moved from a very small town to a relatively large city. It was for university, and I was around 19 years old. Since I wouldn't be in the new city until around September, my soon-to-be roommate decided to look for a place for us to live in the fall. In mid-July, she finally found us a decently priced, newly renovated, close to everything apartment. It was on a pretty busy road in the city. Fast forward to September when it was time for me to move in. Myself and my parents get to the building, and it looks a bit disheveled from the front, and upon entering, the inside of the building was an absolute mess. Appliances in the hallways, plaster was running up and down the walls like a child had been given the material to play with, and the flooring was missing in most places. Since the apartment was actually kind of nice, and since it was my first ever apartment away from home, I was absolutely thrilled to finally have a place of my own. Now, this apartment housed many students, as well as the landlord and the superintendent, so it seemed like a relatively safe place to live, right? Wrong. My roommate had the door buzzer hooked up to her phone so that when someone rang, her phone would ring and she had the option to let them in or not. About a week after school had started, I was home since I didn't really have class until later in the day, and my roommate was at work. She texted me to let me know that someone had tried to buzz into the apartment, and when she answered, all she heard on the other end was an unfamiliar voice practically screaming,
Let me in! Let me in right now!
Luckily, my roommate had the sense enough not to let them into the building. About 10 minutes later, someone comes banging right on my door. Without saying anything, they just continued knocking for what felt like hours, although it was probably only about 20 minutes in reality. I stayed in my room the entire time with the door closed because I was absolutely so afraid of who might be standing outside my door. Eventually the knocking stopped, and when I checked the peephole, the person was gone. I felt really relieved that I had avoided what seemed to be some kind of creep looking to get in my apartment for some reason that I really wasn't aware of. Nothing too strange happened again until about 2 weeks later. Again, I was home since I was sick and my roommate was at work. I should note that my roommate was a flight attendant for a small airline, and obviously she wouldn't have her phone if she was already in the air. As I recall, there was no one to buzz the door this time. So it's early morning and not too long after my roommate left for work, and someone came banging on my door. Of course, I didn't get up to answer it because I was still sick in bed, hoping that they would just go away. We weren't expecting anyone, no packages or friends. And besides, how would they get into the apartment if my roommate's phone didn't ring for the door buzzer? When I finally think whoever was knocking at the door has left, someone actually unlocks the door to my apartment and walks right in. I was mortified. I always sleep with my room door closed, so there was absolutely no way that they would have known someone was in there except by opening the door. Since my roommate was a flight attendant, I knew it wasn't her because her flight would have been gone by this time, so there was really no way she could even answer her phone since there's no service when they're up in the air. I was frantically texting her to let her know that someone was indeed in our apartment without our permission. Where we live, our landlord must give 24 hours notice before entering the property. As I lay in bed crying and shaking out of pure fear, the person seemed to have just walked around the living room area and then left again. As soon as I heard the front door shut, I ran and locked all of the locks and put across the chain that would keep anyone from getting in, even if they had a key. To this day, neither me or my roommate know if it was the same person or someone who had previously lived in the apartment. We have no idea who it could have been. We left that apartment building only a couple months after that and moved into a more friendly and seemingly safer neighborhood. Whenever I drive past that building now, I always get the creeps. I don't think that I'll ever forget what happened. In Michigan, there's a little...
They describe Viktor Orban as an authoritarian. Are you working for a nationalist extremist regime?
Well, no, I'm not. They started to describe Hungary as an evil country, but then something changed, and I think that change was Trump.
Your prime minister's instinct to fight against chemical castration of children, how did he know to go against it?
He's a devoted Christian.
A place called Traverse City. It's a smallish, very esoteric hippie kind of town. In this town, there's a bona fide abandoned mental institution, complete with an absolutely enormous deserted grounds and dilapidated buildings, an old rusty water tower, and a huge stone basin in the middle of the woods that could hold maybe about 50 people. You know, the works. This actually isn't the creepy part, believe it or not, as nothing scary really happened there. It was actually quite the popular hangout for college kids to get stoned and whatnot. It's more of a small detail on just how strange this town is, and kind of a backstory. You see, when the mental ward shut down, the patients were basically let loose to their own devices, and many of them ended up as one of the many homeless people that just roamed the town. And some of them just ended up in the Whiting. The Whiting was the cheapest apartment in town, basically a month-to-month hotel. It really wasn't a bad place. There was a housekeeper that stopped by once a week to clean the place up. It wasn't falling apart or infested with pests or anything. It was technically a sort of halfway home years and years ago, and it had to be shut down when some man was found dead of heroin overdose on the front steps. It eventually reopened to the public again, and some of the people who lived there previously had nowhere else to go and moved back in. At this point of the story, I was a really broke college kid. I got some really weird vibes from the place, but I was really short on money, and I thought it would be an interesting experience to say the least. Well, I wasn't wrong. First of all, it looked like the architect had actually gleaned inspiration from The Shining. Long, narrow hallways, some straight and some swooping around. Some that started out normal and then got so narrow that you literally had to walk sideways to fit. There was painted over doors and doors that led to nowhere, and tiny doll-sized doors in the hallway that never opened. There were a lot of creepy pictures of crying girls or off-putting abstract paintings decorating the walls. My friend lived in a small room that had a large mysterious X painted over his bed. He also had a painted over locked door to his left. And my other friend who lived on the second story at the end of the building had a window that looked out of a straight up brick wall. Pretty bizarre, right? Well, wait until you meet your neighbors. Schizophrenics and drugged out zombies wandered up and down the halls or peeked out of their doors before slamming it shut. You could just be walking along when the door would suddenly open and a battered looking woman would tell you that the other tenants were trying to hurt her and that she was going to be sleeping with a knife for protection. Another good friend of mine once opened her door and found an entire lamp taken apart piece by piece and then aligned on her doorstep. There's a few incidents that really stick out in my mind. Once I went to the shattered kitchen to make myself lasagna. One of the women was already there and she was sitting in a kitchen chair just talking to herself in a high-pitched girly voice. Now, this woman was a big and rather imposing individual, made all the more intimidating because she had a habit of ramming people in the shoulder whenever she passed them in the halls. She's just sitting there and mocking and insulting me the entire time, but all to herself as if I can't hear her, all while eyeing me with a sideways dead-eyed kind of look. Every now and then she gives a high-pitched giggle that sounded truly sinister. Well, I then say, everything alright? And she's muttering to herself, the thing's talking to me. I won't respond. And then she giggles. I'm definitely perplexed at this point. I pick up a fork and I'm getting ready to exit, and she then starts really flipping out and starts rapidly saying, "You got a fork? You gonna kill me with that? You gonna stab me in the throat and murder my family with that fork?" Yes, she was actually screaming by the end of it. I didn't stick around. I could still hear her screaming whenever I would take my crap out of the door, going on about hurting her. And just like some movie, I can hear high-pitched hysterical laughter echoing down the halls as she gets louder and louder. Truly brought goosebumps up to my arms, I can tell you that. Another time, a man was so messed up on some substances that he could hardly stand, and he tried to chase me. He was at the foot of the stairs and I had to pass him, and he tried to slur some nonsense at me while I walked by him. I think he said something about a shower. Well, he reaches out and grabs my arm and then tries pulling me toward him. I pull away so fast that he gets knocked over, and as I'm running up the stairs, he's trying to collect himself and stand back up. I hide in my friend's room and we can hear him slouching and banging up the stairs, just calling for me in a doped up sort of way. About a week later, he apparently forgets about it and I see him in the lobby. He had asked me which room I lived in. So yeah, that's a brief summary of the really creepy place that I lived in at one point. It was definitely an interesting and creepy experience to say the least.
Thank you for reading my story. I must start by saying this story falls about average or maybe even below average on the scary meter. But it was such a strange event that I found it discussion worthy. So maybe some of you will rate it high on that strange meter and maybe some of you will just think it's lame. I lived in the third house at the end of a dead-end road just on the outside of a small town in Ohio. Many strange and dark things happened there. Maybe I will share those stories some other time. But one night, I was left perplexed by something I saw from my bedroom window. This old house did not have central air. Although I had a window unit in my bedroom, I'd like to shut it off and open the windows on cool, breezy nights. I loved listening to the sounds of nature. Surrounding the dead-end road were many miles of woods where I would see coyotes, raccoons, possum, and deer. These were everyday sightings. There were many times throughout many nights where the woods would go silent. I think most of you know when the woods go silent, there is likely a predator of some kind nearby. One night I had my windows open. It's after midnight sometime, and I'm just browsing Pinterest on my phone when the woods go silent. It seemed like it was 5 minutes or so before I noticed how long everything had been silent. You could even hear a pin drop. Normally, when the woods go silent, it was never for more than a couple of minutes. Being curious and wondering if coyotes were sniffing around my front porch again, I got up and looked out my bedroom window that faces the front of the house. Now, at this time I can't remember if I had started listening to these kind of podcasts or not, so I'm not sure if I had ever heard the stories of wendigos or not deer creatures. Listening to one of the Swamp Dweller podcast shows made me remember this event and realize what I saw may have been one of these creatures. For context, the road at the front of my house was paved and went straight until it widened off into our driveway to the left, and the other portion went straight ahead to the right and turned into a dirt and gravel road. Then I looked out the window. Everything was silent, and I was surprised to see what appeared to be a very large and lonely buck walking down the middle of the road towards the dirt road and straight ahead. I watched for it, finding it strange that it was all alone. Normally when you see one deer, there are at least a few close by. As I watched it walking towards the dirt road, I thought it looked strange. First off, I'll be honest, I'm no hunter, but this buck looked massive. 2 or 3 times larger than what might be considered average. Not only was it large, but the way it walked, like it was being worked like a string puppet, or like it was in a trance, or maybe even how a soldier would march. It never turned and looked at me. I never made a sound. I just stood there, rubbing my eyes trying to figure out what the heck I was seeing. I was 100% sober during this, just a heads up. Before it reached the point where I couldn't be able to see it from my window, I looked around. I'm not sure why. Maybe I was trying to see any other deer to rationalize what this was. This was only for a second, and when I looked back, it was gone. There was no way it could have left my line of sight so quickly. That's when I realized I never heard its footsteps. It never made a sound. Just the woods came back to life right then and there, and I almost jumped out of my skin from being so spooked. I just stood at my window, feeling bewildered. What the hell did I just see? Whatever it was definitely not a deer. This thing made the forest, which was usually very loud at night, go dead quiet. The way it walked, its size, how it just disappeared. The whole situation was just so bizarre. I thought about telling my roommate what I saw, but he was not a sensitive person and not a big believer in the unknown or the paranormal. Although a year or 2 later, when the house was being renovated, he started to believe. But hey, that's another story entirely. So there it is, my potential not deer sighting. Like I said, it's not the scariest story, but it's a head scratcher. Do any of you have a similar story? Can anyone tell me what they think I saw, or what they think the not deer was doing marching down the road just to disappear? I feel like if I had made a sound or engaged with it, the situation may have escalated. I was always under the impression that there might be a portal on the property for spirits or unknown things to come and go through. Is that what the not deer was doing? Just taking the portal back to hell for a dinner engagement with Satan? This story takes place in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee. For those who are not aware, The Appalachian mountain range is approximately 480 million years old, and I've always wondered, while hiking in the park, about what kind of animals once roamed the hills we hike today. In the summertime, the dense vegetation and the abundant rhododendrons can take you back to a prehistoric age when the dinosaurs would have foraged among the same hills the hikers now casually walk, basking in the unparalleled beauty that is the Smokies. This event happened in late December, when the leaves fall off the deciduous trees, opening the hills to your eyes, allowing you to see the contours of the land as you hike. Me and my girlfriend were staying in the small town of Weirs Valley, which is approximately 45 minutes west of the bustling tourist trap of Gatlinburg. We'd stayed in Gatlinburg in years past and decided that this year we wanted a small cabin far from the normal hustle and bustle of the late December tourist rush. Many of the locals spitefully call this period from Christmas to New Year's Hell Week. Knowing this, we decided to stop at a small hiking store and inquired about a day hike that would take us far into the backcountry. They pulled out a map detailing the western end of the park and showed us multiple trails that would fit our description. We ended up settling on a trail that was about 4 miles one way, with a massive waterfall as the reward at the end of the trail. We arrived at the trailhead at about 9 in the morning, and there was only about one car there already. Perfect. It was an elderly couple getting their packs ready for their hike, and we were excited at the lack of hikers. As our goal for the day was to try and not see a human being for the entire hike, the first half of the hike was entirely uneventful. We reached the waterfall after about 2 hours or so, and sat down and took a lunch break before departing back towards the trailhead. Before I continue the story, I want to make a note that we had not seen a single person the entire hike so far. We had not even seen so much as a plane flying overhead. That's why we turned the corner on the trail and we froze in our places. There was a girl walking alone about 50 yards ahead of us. Now, normally it's not uncommon to see people hiking alone, but they typically look the part. They usually have a hiking pack, hiking shoes, and they'll almost always acknowledge you and ask you how your day is before you go in your separate ways. Not this girl. First and foremost, she did not look like she belonged out there. She looked like she was about 15 or 16 years old, and she did not have a bag or any wallet. She was about 15 or 16 wearing tennis shoes, which was odd considering that this rugged trail demanded heavy hiking boots. We were shocked to see her out this far by herself, and we were even more disturbed that we didn't see her before turning the corner on the trail. She essentially appeared out of nowhere. After me and my girlfriend exchanged concerned looks, we decided to continue down the trail as normal, as we didn't want this girl to turn around and see us just standing there and spook her. We made ourselves known as best as we could by kicking rocks with our boots and talking to each other. This girl didn't turn around and acknowledge us or even respond to us one time, even when we said hello. After about 50 yards of following her at a distance, we reached a creek crossing with a rudimentary path of dry rocks as the only way to cross. She put her arms out to balance herself, and we both noticed that when she put her arms up, it didn't look right. Unless you had terrible balance, there was no reason to balance yourself on this little creek crossing. Calling it a creek is almost giving it too much credit, as it was more like a gentle stream coming off the hill that crossed the trail and flowed to the river below. The water at its deepest was no more than 6 inches, and if you had halfway decent hiking boots, you could simply walk through the water without getting your feet wet. Wanting to be considerate of our fellow hiker, we decided to wait behind her as she arduously crossed the creek. She took way more time than she needed to cross, and it felt like she was deliberately walking slow to creep us out. We crossed the creek in about 30 seconds time after watching her take 2 or 3 minutes. Keep in mind, this creek was maybe 15 feet long at that, and as I mentioned, maybe 6 inches deep. I decided to cross before my girlfriend, because I had a nauseating feeling in the pit of my stomach about the entire situation, and I wanted to put something between her and my girlfriend. Because I had my eyes glued on this girl, I wasn't paying attention to where I was walking, and my foot slipped from the rock and fell into the water, making a very loud splash. Even though this girl was less than 20 feet ahead of us, she still did not turn around and acknowledge us, After me and my girlfriend crossed the creek, we could see that shortly ahead were a set of switchbacks going down the mountain. We decided to stop and put some distance between us and the girl. She was walking at an incredibly slow pace, and we waited for a couple of minutes before we saw that she had gone around the corner down the first switchback. Me and my girlfriend had a brief conversation about what the heck just happened, and we collected ourselves and continued down the trail. We didn't think anything much of it, we just tried to continue going without being unnerved any further. We thought that was the case, and so when we turned down the first switchback and saw something terrible, well, we saw nothing at all. The girl had vanished, unless she took off at a sprint as soon as she turned the corner. We should have seen her. The switchback was very gradual, and we could clearly see the next 5 or 6 switchbacks below us. The leaves were gone off the trees, allowing us to see every foot of the trail below. Even if she started running, we would have heard her. The main river was about 500 feet below us, and the rushing water was barely audible from where we were standing. She either vanished, hid behind a tree from us, or somehow managed to sprint a quarter-mile down the mountain in complete silence away from us. We had absolutely no idea what to think, so we once again stopped to collect ourselves. We were terrified and were not sure whether to go back up the mountain or continue down as planned. After a hurried deliberation, we decided to proceed down the trail as normal. We never saw her. As we reached the trailhead, we ran into a group of hikers, and we figured we'd ask them if they saw a teenage girl hiking along without a backpack. They gave us a strange look and said we were the first people they'd seen on the trail all day. We simply thanked them and continued, as to not scare them. I've always heard of paranormal things happening in the Smokies, from Bigfoot to skinwalkers to a group of wild mountain people living primitively within the park. I've always entertained these stories because who doesn't love a good ghost story? I've never anticipated having an encounter of my own in the woods. The scariest thing to me about the encounter all these years later, though, is that we never saw her face.
Before my husband and I got married, we were living together in a mediocre apartment complex in a similarly mediocre part of the city. Now, it wasn't an especially dangerous place, but security at the complex was severely lacking. For context, I once had my car stolen right out of the parking lot in broad daylight without anyone noticing. Another issue with the complex's parking lot was its shortage of spaces. This was usually more of an annoyance than anything, but on one occasion, it had put me in very real danger. I was still finishing my degree at the time, and I had night classes that, in combination with an hour-and-a-half commute, left me getting home on most nights well after 11 p.m. Often I was lucky enough to find a space in the main parking lot by my building, but there were a few occasions when I found myself having to park in a much farther lot. The lot was very poorly lit, it had no buildings near it, and usually had very few cars in it. It was creepy in and of itself, but what really scared me about it was the extended walk from it. As a 21-year-old woman, I had already had plenty of experience with creeps, late-night walks, and unpleasant combinations of the two, but usually those walks were down a street or somewhere more public. Walking alone through this big, dark, empty lot really made me feel like sitting prey. No one had noticed when someone stole my car in the middle of the day. Why should I expect anyone to notice if something happened to me there in the middle of the night? With all this going through my head most nights to begin with, there was one evening in particular when getting out of my car just felt like a really bad idea. Now, I'm not a superstitious person, but my intuition was buzzing from the very minute that I unlocked my door. I'd only taken a few steps when I had spotted a man standing stock still right by the dumpster near my building. He didn't have any trash. He wasn't looking through it. He wasn't smoking. He wasn't doing anything. He was just standing there looking at me. I was still all the way across the parking lot, but other than getting back in my car, there was no way around him. The dumpster was squarely in the middle of the two entrances to my building, so no matter which way I went, I'd have to walk directly toward him. My keys were already between my fingers, but I wasn't feeling very confident about whether this would help or not. I'm not a strong person, and I'm also only about 5'3". More than anything, I felt silly for being so afraid. but I knew in my gut something was wrong. This man had appeared out of nowhere. I'd driven past the dumpster on my way into the lot, and he hadn't been there. Also, I knew what everyone in my building had looked like, and there's absolutely no way that he would have had time to get there from another building between when I passed the dumpster and when I parked. As I got closer, it became increasingly obvious that I wasn't imagining the man staring at me, especially because, as I got closer, he turned his body so that he was always facing me, kind of like a sunflower, just rotating in place, always watching me. Then came the moment when I had to pass him to get to the door. I felt really silly doing it, but I turned around and walked half backwards as I got close to passing him. I left a really wide space between us as I drew near by walking in the grass instead of on the sidewalk, but I still didn't want to turn my back on him. Eventually, though, I had to, and the second I did, I heard footsteps. Not just footsteps, but running footsteps. They were coming toward me, and really fast. So I ran too. I sprinted to the building, ran up the steps to the door, entered the pen as quickly as I could, and then hoped to hell that he wouldn't be able to follow me. I didn't stop running until I got to my apartment door, 3 flights of stairs later. My neighbors were probably pissed about the noise, but I was terrified. The second I got in the door, I told my then fiancé everything that happened between panic breaths, and he immediately called security. While he did, I went to go peek through the balcony window to see if I could spot the man. I couldn't. He was nowhere to be seen. When security finally arrived, they reported the same. No one was around. I still have no idea what the man was doing there before I got there or where he came from, and I've moved across town since then. But to that really creepy guy from my apartment parking lot, I really hope to never encounter you ever again.
I'm a senior in college at the moment. This happened during last semester in the fall. Like most college kids, I use Snapchat to communicate with the majority of my friends, and I've used it for many years. I don't really get added by people that much unless I know them in person, so around the beginning of last semester when I started getting added by people a lot, I thought it was strange. It didn't take me long at all to figure out that the people adding me were bots. I would get added by a bot roughly once a week, sometimes multiple times in a week. They would always be a female, and oftentimes would send me some sort of spam chat message or something like that. When this happened, I would always just ignore it and would never add them back or anything like that. One day, I got added by another account with a female name. I looked at the account to see that it was more than likely another spam account. I didn't recognize the name, and the user didn't have a snap score when I looked. After that, I deleted them and moved on. But a short time later, I received a Snapchat from them. It was a text message, and I expected it to be another spam message, but when I clicked on the chat, it was pretty threatening. They said something like I better watch my back, and I was in trouble. They also said they were going to get me. This actually got me to respond. I asked who this was and why they said that. They only responded to say basically the same thing, but in all caps. I was kind of creeped out by this. I was a pretty quiet guy, and didn't really have that many friends at college, but the friends that I did have were very close, and I knew they wouldn't do something like that to me. But still, I decided to ask any of them if they knew anything about it. They all told me no, and didn't seem to know why I was getting these messages. The next day, I got another threatening and cryptic message. It was just saying basically that I was a bad person and that I was in trouble. I asked who the person was who was sending me this. They didn't respond to me at all, and at that point, I decided to block them. That way, they wouldn't be able to contact me anymore. But later in that day, I saw I was added by another account. This account was another female name. I decided to look up the name, but it came back with no results on all social media sites that I looked it up on. They sent me the same message again, and I immediately blocked the account this time also. After that, I started getting paranoid. Everywhere that I went around campus, I would wonder if I was being watched, or who wanted to get me. When I was in classes, I would wonder if it was another student, or when I was in the cafeteria, I would look around to see if anyone was watching me. I never seemed to get any clues as to why someone was threatening me like this. I didn't get at it again for 2 days, But then I was added by another person. This person's name I also didn't recognize, and I got another message from them. At this point, I looked in my settings and was able to change them so that nobody could send me snaps unless I had added them back. This made me feel a little bit better. I did get added by another person the next day, but I never bothered to look after I didn't recognize their name. After this, I figured whoever it was would give up. I didn't get added by anyone else for a while. I was starting to feel better about things, until one day I was added by another user again. When I looked, it was actually a girl who I had in a class with me, and she occasionally talked to me. I added her back, but a short time later, I saw that she had snapped me. When I opened up the message, I could clearly see that it was someone else pretending to be her. Her snap score was very low, and I got another threatening message. I immediately blocked the account. This really creeped me out to know that whoever was threatening me even knew the name of the classmates who I talked to. For the rest of the semester, I was on edge, but I didn't get added by any more people. This semester has gone by fine, and nothing has happened since. I just still wonder who it was, though, and why they were doing it. I'm a 23-year-old female living in a 2-bedroom house with my roommate. I moved into the house last year. My roommate is one of my good friends from college who happened to take a job in the same city as me, which isn't very far from the college we attended together. I would use Snapchat every day and had a pretty large number of friends on there and people who I snapped. I would get added by guys that I didn't know quite a bit. Sometimes I wouldn't know them at all, and other times they would be guys that I went to school with or actually did know in some way. One night last summer, I was in my bedroom just chilling on my laptop when I casually looked at my phone to see a few Snapchat notifications. I saw that somebody had added me named Josh M. I didn't really think that I recognized him, but I wasn't quite sure, so I added him back and then was going to send him a snap asking who he was. But before I could, he beat me to it. He sent me a snap, and I opened it up. It was a picture of about half of his face, and he said, "Hey." He appeared to be in a dark area, and I couldn't tell much detail at all about him other than he was white with darkish hair. I sent him a snap back saying, "Do I know you?" He snapped me back almost immediately saying, "Yes, don't you remember me?" I asked him where I knew him from because I really didn't remember him. He just responded with a snap of his face and no words. I wasn't believing that he knew me at all, because after seeing more snaps of his face, he wasn't looking any more familiar. I didn't respond to him, but he sent me another snap a minute later asking me what I was doing. I told him nothing and asked him once again how he knew me. He didn't answer me this time either, and once again sent a blank snap of his face. He wasn't really making any sense, and when I left him unread again, he sent me another snap asking where I was. In that moment, I was happy to remember that I never had my location turned on in Snapchat, so nobody could ever tell where I was. I wanted to know more about this guy, so I clicked on his profile on Snapchat to see his username. But when I did, I noticed that he had his Snapchat location turned on. I then clicked on the map to see where he was and maybe get a better idea of where he was from. But when I did, I couldn't believe my eyes. He appeared to be right outside my house on the street. My heart suddenly started racing. My blinds were covering the windows of my bedroom so I couldn't see out. I decided to slowly walk over to them and carefully look out. I noticed a car parked on the side of the street. It was a little ways away, and I figured this had to be the guy. I then went back on my phone to see that he had snapped me again. I opened it. I could now see that he was in a car. He asked me to stop leaving him on red, and at this point, I sent him a snap asking him where he was right now. I saw he opened the snap right away, but he didn't respond right away like he usually did. I waited several minutes, but he never did reply. I then looked back at the snap map, but he was now gone. He had turned his location off. I was afraid he had realized I was onto him and was now hiding. I slowly went back to the window, but when I looked out, the car was now gone. I was terrified. I now had no idea where he was and thought maybe he just parked down the street and was going to try to break into my house or something. I called my roommate to tell her what was going on, but I knew that she was at work and the chances of her picking up were slim. Sure enough, she didn't answer. I quickly went around the house making sure that all of the doors and windows were closed and locked. Thankfully, they all were. I went back into my bedroom and locked the door. I was just hoping that whoever this Josh guy was had actually left and wouldn't come back. About 20 minutes later, I heard a noise coming from my front door area. My heart started to pound even harder than it already was. I knew the door was locked though, so I was just hoping whoever was in there wouldn't try to break in. I got out my phone ready to call the police. Then, I heard the sound of the door opening. I couldn't believe it and I started to freak out. Until finally, I heard the voice of my roommate. It was her coming home from work early and not the Josh guy. I was so relieved and went over and told her everything. We were both a little creeped out for the rest of the night, but the Josh guy never came back. The next day, the Josh user had been deleted from Snapchat. I never did find out who he was or why he was seemingly stalking me. A few months ago, my best friend Joe and I got invited to one of our other friends' birthday parties. Unfortunately for me, I had to work that night, and I wasn't able to go. However, afterwards, Joe asked if I'd pick him up, and then he'd buy me food. I said sure, because I was always down for free food. I guess they had the party at a bar downtown in the major city that we live near. I was kind of bummed that I had to work, because as I was at work, I saw a few Snapchat stories of some of my friends, and it looked like a pretty good time. When I finally got off of work at about 10:30 p.m., I got a Snapchat from Joe saying he was ready for me to come pick him up. We mainly communicated through the text chat on Snapchat. I told him that I was on the way and asked him where to pick him up from. He then sent me his location on the Snap map, and I could tell the general area where it was. I asked him for a specific address, but he just said to follow his Snapchat location. This made it a little bit harder with no address, but I could still do it. I drove to the area, which was about 15 minutes from where I was. I got to where Joe was on the Snap map, but it was in what appeared to be a back alley behind several businesses. It didn't really look like bars though, just more like warehouse or apartments or something like that. I told Joe I was there, and he said he would be out in a minute. Then he sent me a snap saying he couldn't find me and asked me to get out of my car. I was wondering what Joe's problem was because I thought he was acting really strange. I parked my car and got out. I wasn't intending on being out of my car for long, just enough to call out for Joe to see if I could see where he was. But what happened instead was I saw 3 men start to run out from the building that I was next to. They were running straight for me. I quickly got back inside of my car and locked the door before the men reached me. Thankfully, I hadn't gone more than 2 steps from my car, or I wouldn't have made it back. I had no idea who these men were, but they were now trying to open my doors and all shouting at me. I sped away as fast as I could and drove all the way home. I contacted a few of my other friends who had been with Joe that night, and it was told to me that Joe had lost his phone at the bar earlier. I realized someone must have took it, and was now pretending to be Joe and communicating with his contacts. I went to the police and told them everything. Joe's phone was found cracked and in a dumpster a week later. Joe was able to get a new phone, but I don't think they ever found out who the men were who took it and chased after me.
This happened pretty recent, about 3 weeks ago. Myself and 3 friends were hanging out at a shopping center one evening. We were messing around posting clips on TikTok. Then one of my friends started laughing, and I asked her what she was laughing at. She told me that guy behind us kept staring at me. When I turned around, it was some older guy just watching me. He had black sunglasses, a cap, an old Adidas tracksuit with scuffed up shoes, and had a disgusting looking beard.
I remember coming to you and saying, look, you came from a failed marriage. I came from a failed marriage. You grew up in a broken home. I grew up in a broken home. You had a lot of trauma as a kid. I had a lot of trauma as a kid. We don't really know how to do this right. We don't know what we don't know. Let's figure out how to communicate properly. Let's learn the tools and techniques that neither of us were taught it. Not to mention we weren't taught it, but we didn't have role models. to role model that type of behavior. Welcome to the Erase Show. This is going to be a very special episode.
My friends thought it was hilarious, but I found it really weird. Then another one of my friends said she thinks that guy lives on her street, about a few houses down from her. She said that he actually follows her on TikTok. At that point, I quickly got my phone out to check if he was following me, and he was. I had to block him because he seemed a bit creepy. We went to get McDonald's before we went home, and I received a message on TikTok from someone. It was that guy who had been following us. His name was Greg, and he wrote, "Why did you block me?" with 2 emojis. One was a crying face, and the other one was an angry face. He had actually created another account that day in the shopping center. I blocked that account as well, hoping that would be the end of it. I didn't mention it to my friends this time, knowing they would just laugh. That night, I was up late and had Netflix on in the background as I was chatting with my friends on Facebook while scrolling through TikTok. I got up to use the bathroom, and when I returned, I had 3 messages from my friends, all saying the same thing. All were things like, "Who's in your room?" and "What's up with your last post?" I asked them what they were talking about, and they told me to check my TikTok, so I did. It was a clip of my bedroom. It was a clip of someone picking up my phone and recording the inside of my room. At that point, I heard a creaking. Then I heard a man's voice say, "Sorry. Please don't scream." And turned to see my closet door slightly open. I started to scream when the same guy who had been following us burst out of my closet and tried to cover my mouth. Thank God I screamed and it was enough for my parents to hear. They came upstairs and my dad tackled the guy to the floor. The police were called and he was arrested. We were informed that the guy had straight up admitted to stalking and breaking and entering. One of my friends pointed out, if I go back and look at the post on TikTok from when we were in the shopping center, you can see Greg is in almost all of those pictures, somewhere in the background. I haven't heard what's going to happen to Greg yet, but I just hope he won't ever come near us again.
I'm 16, and this story happened about 4 months ago. My friend Lisa and I frequently use TikTok. We both have about 100 followers each. Not a lot, mainly just friends and family. One day I was in a grocery store nearby where we live, and there was a stand that was selling unusual items such as Ouija boards, spell books, and other creepy novelty items. I thought to pick up a Ouija board so that Lisa and I could mess around with it, maybe post some ghost encounters on TikTok. I told Lisa about it, and she thought it was a good idea. So the following Friday night, when Lisa's parents would be gone for most of the evening, we thought it would be the perfect time to test out the board. We turned all the lights out, lit some candles, and pulled the curtains closed. We asked the cliche questions like, is there a presence? Can you hear us? What's your name? Etc. We posted a few clips on TikTok saying nothing yet. Then one of our followers commented to ask if there was something stronger than a spirit. So we gave it a shot. We asked the board if there was something other than a human spirit in the room. Me and Lisa waited anxiously, hoping we would get a response, but sort of hoping we wouldn't. About 20 seconds went by before the candles suddenly went out and the room went dead cold. Even though the room was already dark, it felt like it had gotten darker somehow. You could honestly feel something was with us. We put the board away and decided to watch a movie. We posted another clip on TikTok explaining what happened. Most people in the comments said that it was probably the wind or something. One person said it did work, but we just ignored him, thinking that he was trying to creep us out or something. About 2 days later, Lisa started acting weird. She wasn't eating much and stopped posting on TikTok, which was weird as she was on it all the time. This went on for about a week and a half. She stopped posting, she barely spoke a word to me, and she didn't really go to school. The strangest thing happened after a few weeks passed. After her not responding to any of my texts or calls, I went to her house and her mom told me that she had gone to stay with her grandparents for a while. I asked what was wrong, and she just said she hadn't been feeling well and just needed a break. The last post Lisa made was her trying to crack a smile in her bedroom. Then there was a noise coming from behind her. To describe it, kinda sounded like a low, guttural growling. She was slowly turning around as if something was behind her. The clip ended there, and like I said, this was around 4 months ago, and I haven't heard or seen Lisa since then. I never really believed in anything paranormal, but I honestly think when we used the Ouija board, we let something dark into our lives, and whatever it was stayed with Lisa. I just hope she's okay. Recently, I quit posting on TikTok.
I used to frequently use TikTok watching trick shots, gaming posts, and other comedy clips. There is one guy who I followed though. I won't say his name, but the clips he posted were very unusual. They weren't very nice, to be honest. He used to wear this featureless mask and do things like spy on people in their house and frighten them. He even went as far as to attack someone. I gotta say, I'm not sure if it was real or not, because the clips would end before you could tell, but it felt genuine to me. I'm not proud that I watched this guy harass and assault people, but I did. One day I noticed I had gotten a new follower on TikTok. It was the same guy that I just mentioned. At first I was a bit worried, but shrugged it off. I was in an underground parking lot after I was done grocery shopping. It was late in the evening, so the parking lot was practically empty. Well, it looked empty, but I could feel that there was someone there with me. I suddenly became very paranoid. That night I was scrolling through my TikTok and saw a clip that made my heart sink. It was me in the parking lot looking anxiously around my surroundings. It was by the same guy that had followed me on TikTok from earlier. The next 2 days were the same. I was very paranoid, thinking I was being watched and followed, and my suspicions were confirmed because each night that guy had posted, it was clips of me. I felt sick and decided to call the police. Unfortunately, they said there wasn't much they could do, as no crime had been committed. A week went by, and the post stopped. I started to relax, thinking maybe he had just moved on, and it was all part of his prank thing or whatever. That was until I was attacked outside my house. I was hit over the head with something. I fell to the ground, nearly knocked out, but I was still conscious enough for a moment to see. What I saw will haunt me forever. It was a man standing over me with a featureless mask holding a phone up. I passed out, but the next thing I remember was waking up in a hospital. I was found by someone who lived nearby. I told the police of what happened, but his account had been deleted. Whether or not his clips were staged or fake, his assault on me certainly was real. The weird thing I don't understand is why he deleted his account after attacking me. Unlike the other people, I deleted my TikTok. And this incident and the experience has scarred me for life. I just want to tell you, be aware of your surroundings, because you never know who could be watching you. And honestly, I would stay off of TikTok and any other social media.
Back in 2014, I joined a Facebook group that was started specifically for people who are from the town I grew up in Southern California. The whole group shared memories of the town, and everyone seemed nice, except for one person. There's always at least one asshole. This guy got on the bad side of one of the admins, whose name was Robert, and ended up being booted from the group. I'll note that I was in my mid-30s at the time, and most of the members were at least 20 years older than me. Robert was approaching 60 and was married with children who were about my age. Robert took a liking to me. Since he was married, I didn't think his friendship would go any further than that, but I was mistaken. He said that I was a down-to-earth girl and was easy to talk to. He and I exchanged phone numbers, and he would message me quite a bit. However, Robert took it a step further and found out where I lived, my landline number, and my mother's address in California. He had a subscription to one of those sites that contain information on people, their age, phone numbers, possible relatives, previous addresses, etc. He found out through Facebook when my birthday was, and he sent me flowers. I thanked him, but I started to get suspicious. His behavior was becoming alarming. He started complaining that all his wife wanted from him was his pain pills and money. Around this time, I met the man who would eventually become my husband, and of course, I announced it on Facebook. Robert went into a ballistic rage upon hearing this, saying that I should have known that he was in love with me. I told him, "You're married. Why are you in love with another woman?" He began texting me at least 10 to 20 times a day, going from calling me hateful names to profusely apologizing. I blocked his number, so he started blowing up my landline. Most of the time I kept it unplugged, so I didn't get most of the voicemails that he would leave. One day, out of curiosity, I did listen to some of the voicemails I got. In one of the messages, he claimed that I owed him $13,000. He then started making threats about how he would come to where I lived and would also pay my mother a visit. I blocked him on my landline and informed my mother about the situation. Robert got clever and started texting me from random numbers located all over California. He even sent letters to my home, and nothing he said in those letters made any sense. That's when I decided that I needed a restraining order. I tried twice through my county court, but since I lived in Washington State at the time, the judge wouldn't grant it since we lived in different states. Once Robert found out that I couldn't file a restraining order, he sent me more hateful messages and told me that I would never get rid of him. So I went back to court with the new messages. For this new hearing, Robert mailed in a letter of rebuttal. He claimed that he was a civil servant who had worked at a school district at one time and was an electrician by trade. He also said that he was on disability and couldn't drive longer for more than a half an hour without experiencing excruciating pain, and posed the question, how could he possibly come to Washington State? I told the judge that this wasn't true, because he openly posted all day about his motorcycle trips to Malibu on Facebook. Regardless of the evidence, I wasn't granted a restraining order, and I felt failed by the system. I blocked him on all social media, emails, and phone numbers, but he obviously would still call using new numbers. He made a duplicate Facebook page with my profile picture, and sent out friend requests to all of my friends. He had my real Facebook profile blocked, and I found out when a friend messaged me, "I got a friend request from you, but I already thought we were friends." My friend then told me that this fake profile of mine was making all kinds of posts talking shit about me. My friend reported it, and thankfully Facebook took it down. I changed my cell phone number, and I eventually moved into a new place. Things died down for a while, but Robert somehow found me on LinkedIn. After that, I straight up deleted LinkedIn and Facebook, and I saw that he even followed me on my YouTube page. I don't know how to remove someone, so I just blocked him there. The last time I heard from Robert was an email that I received from an account with the name John Sims. I knew it was him because he references trying to find my brother years back, and how I asked him for his help. I didn't ask anyone for help, by the way, because I don't have a relationship with my brother, because he has a drug addiction problem and is a diagnosed schizophrenic. To wrap up this insane story, I'll include a screenshot of the email he sent, and a recording of some of the messages he left.
Hey, I need you to unblock me and respond to me, please. consider doing that? It's the Christian thing to do, don't you think? Please, I'm not playing around. Bye. Look, if you don't respond to me, you're not leaving me too many choices here, and there only leaves me one, and I don't want to do that, and I don't want to blindside you. I wish you would just talk to me. We could work this out, but obviously you don't want that. But you're not leaving me much of a choice, and I won't be going after a paycheck. Bye.
This happened last year when I was 14. There's this dating app for teenagers. I used it as more of a joke. It was connected to Snapchat, so whenever you matched with someone, you would add them to Snapchat so you could continue talking to your match. As I said, at first I was using it as a joke, but then I matched with this really good-looking guy, and I thought, well, would it hurt to try? So I accepted his request to be my friend on Snapchat. I sent a shy hi to him and waited for a response. It took him about 2 hours to respond, and the only thing he sent was a blank black picture. I didn't think too much of it, and I continued on with my day. But the next day I get a message from him, a picture of a very familiar thing. My school. It was only a little jarring, but I figured he probably went to the same school and we had just never met. Then my phone began to vibrate like crazy during a class. To give a little perspective, we have glass doors and windows. They look out into the corridors during class, and when I checked my phone, I saw maybe 15 pictures sent to me from the same guy. They were pictures of me sitting at my desk in the classroom. The pictures kept coming. They seemed to have been taken from outside that window next to the door. When I looked over, I saw someone standing there just outside that window. He had a phone in his hand and he was pointing at me. Whoever it was wearing a black hoodie. The hood covered half of his face and the other half was pale, and he had a sharp jawline. I could see thin lips curved into a grin. And I saw my friend. She was looking at him too, and her face turned red and she began to shake. We were the only ones who saw them, because as fast as we tried to say something, the figure was gone. My friend stood up from her chair and went to the door to open it. It caught my teacher's attention, and we had to explain what we were doing. We had to tell them what we saw. My teacher went out herself to look for whoever this was, and then she even told the office. They let out a message over the speakers, telling everyone to look out for this man. Ever since then, I haven't used Snapchat. It was one of the apps I used all the time before. It still creeps me out, though it may have been a joke and it must have been someone who knew me from before, but it was still horrifying. It had made me a lot more paranoid about strangers on the internet.
It all started when I woke up to the sound of someone hammering on my apartment door. That was the first fright I got that night, heart pounding in my chest as I grabbed the bat I kept under my bed and headed towards the door. First thing I do is look through the peephole to make sure it's not anyone sketchy, but I'm greeted by the sight of one of my neighbors. She looks terrified. She's covered in blood, and I can see just through the peephole that her face is a mess. I open up the door, she runs inside and immediately says, "You gotta get me out of here. My boyfriend's trying to kill me." I start to ask her what happened, and she says something like, "There's no time. Just please get me out of here. I swear to God, he'll kill you too for just helping me." That was what sent me into a straight-up panic, because if a guy was willing to beat his girlfriend up that badly, Lord knows that he'd be willing to put me in the ground. I just grabbed my car keys, ran downstairs with the girl following close behind, jumped into my car, then took off into the night. I remember asking her if she had anywhere I could take her, like a friend's or a relative's or something. She said no, and the best thing for us to do would be to drive to a motel so she could call the cops from there. So that's exactly what I did. I drove us to a motel and booked us a room. The clerk was obviously just as concerned as I was, but all it took was to explain that her boyfriend had tried to off her, and they were like, "Geez, make sure you guys call the cops at least." The girl, whose name I didn't know at that point, I just knew she was a neighbor, said that she'd go up to the room and call them, then asked me to get her some ice from the ice machine so she could deal with the swelling on her face. When I got to the room, she said the cops would be there ASAP, took the ice, put it on her face, then just burst into tears. I tried my best to reassure her, telling her she was safe and stuff. Then, when she finally calmed down, I asked her what actually happened back at her apartment. She told me her boyfriend was abusive and that she'd been planning on leaving for a while, but that night was the night she'd finally got the courage together to announce it to him. She said he walked into their bedroom to find her packing a bag, and not long after that, everything went to chaos. She started helping herself to the little bottle of liquor from the minibar, but not after promising she'd pay me back for them once everything had blown over. I had no reason to disbelieve her at the time. I mean, I felt like we had a kind of bond established already, but I abstained because I thought I'd be driving back to the apartment pretty soon. I asked her if she was good to wait on her own while the cops drove out to her, but she asked me if I'd stay to keep her safe. She then made the point that if her boyfriend found the blood on my apartment door, she assured me that she'd left some on there while hammering on it, that he'd know she'd been there and he'd try to attack me, or worse. I'll be honest, I thought it was a pretty good point at the time. I hadn't seen the blood myself, but she was so covered in it that I believed her when she said that there was some on my door. Anyway, about an hour goes by and the cops still haven't showed up, and the motel rooms were arranged in a horseshoe shape, so we'd have seen them rolling into the parking lot if they had. I asked her to call them back to see what was going on, because obviously it was a really urgent situation, and I know that there was basically no way for the boyfriend in finding us, but I was still really paranoid that he would somehow. That's when the inconsistencies started, because she gave me some lame duck of a reply like, "I'm sure they'll be here soon." If that was me, I'd have called 911 again if they hadn't shown up within like 10 minutes. So what was she so calm about that she was just cool with waiting for them for like an hour at that point? I put it down to booze, and at that point I was okay with waiting too. It wasn't like I had anywhere to be. I sure couldn't just go back to my apartment with that psycho supposedly just a few doors down. But that's also about the same time that I started checking out the amount of blood on her nightshirt. She had like an oversized t-shirt and girl boxers on, and like I said earlier, they were drenched with blood, but also with some blood splattered too, like little spots here and there. She had this cut over her eye, and she had a nasty busted lip, but it looked like way too much blood for just those small wounds. So I asked her if she had any other kind of injuries, like an abdominal wound of some kind that might account for all the blood on her. She said no, and that it was all from the busted lip in her eye. And immediately I start smelling nonsense. I asked her again what exactly had happened back at the apartment, and she started getting weirdly defensive about what she told me. I was starting to think it wasn't quite the abusive spouse kind of story that she told me the first time around, but I had no inkling of what was really going on. That being said, I was getting tired of waiting for the cops to show, so I decided to call them back myself. All I had on me was my wallet, my phone, and my car keys, the only three things I'd had time to stuff into the pockets of my shorts before fleeing the apartment. But when I take my phone out to call the cops, she says something along the lines of, "What are you doing?" I state the obvious, that I'm about to call the cops back, and she's like, "Don't." I don't know if it was the way she was looking at me, the way she spoke, or the way she sort of tensed up when I told her that I was about to do that, but the mood in the room just shifted completely. I asked her why not, then just went right back to dialing 911. But by the time the operator spoke down the line, I looked up and saw she had a knife in her hand. She just said, "Hang up, now." So I did. I'd never had a knife pulled on me at that point, and I can't overstate how terrifying it was. It wasn't even just the knife either. It was the overwhelming creepy sensation of knowing that all wasn't what it seemed. I wasn't hiding from the threat. I was with the threat. I'll be honest here. I basically begged her not to hurt me, and to my relief, she said she wouldn't as long as I drove her to the Canadian border. Given this was in Detroit, the border isn't all that far, but I didn't want to catch charges for aiding and abetting or whatever, so I knew I had to think of something to stop that from happening. It's not like I knew I couldn't tell the cops that I'd been threatened or whatever, but I also knew that the longer I spent in this girl's company, the more chances I'd have of being stabbed. So, I tell the girl that I'd drive her to the border, but that I needed to get something to eat first. I play it like I wanted to stop somewhere on the way, knowing she'd reason me down to getting something delivered from a 24-hour joint. She also stated that she'd be the one going down to pick the food up, as she didn't want me having the chance to sound the alarm. That's where she messed up, because she didn't seem to realize, to my infinite relief, that I could order from DoorDash and put something in the notes about needing the cops called to the motel. My whole plan hinged on there being a driver around that late at night, but thank God there was, and I was even able to show her the order without bringing up the notes section that mentioned needing 911 called to the motel. And the cops played it perfectly too. They showed up without any lights and sirens on, didn't park in the lot, walked up to the motel room without being spotted from the window, then just knocked on the door like they were a delivery driver. She walks over, opens up the door, then boom, they had a gun and a taser drawn on her before she even knew what was happening. She had the knife tucked into the back of her girl boxers, but the cops were wise to her drawing on them, and she hit the floor hard after they hit her with the taser. Turned out they'd been looking for her because, get this, she was the abusive partner who'd stabbed her boyfriend almost to death before finding some poor schmuck, i.e. me, to drive her to the border. Dude almost bled to death in their apartment but managed to crawl to another neighbor's place to get help. You should have seen the amount of blood in the hallway when I got back to my apartment building, and the whole place was crawling with cops and forensic gear. I thought I might be able to drive over to a friend's place to stay the night, contaminating a crime scene or whatever, but they had this section of the corridor closed off so I could actually get into where I lived. The cops came to my apartment in the morning to take my statement down and to fill me in on what they thought had happened. That's how I found out exactly what the deal was. It was 100% the craziest, most frightening thing that's ever happened to me ever in my life. And just the fact that I was part of it seems completely surreal to me. But the thing that sticks with me is how easily I swallowed her nonsense story at first. How I thought it was helping someone I knew, someone I could trust, when in reality, one wrong move, and I might not actually be around to tell you this.
If you really like my content and want to support me, please like this video and click the subscribe button. It helps me to grow my channel as essential in reaching a wider audience. Most of you watching my videos aren't subscribed to my channel, and that's why my animations can't reach their full potential. They aren't recommended to more people who would surely love my content as much as you do. You can always unsubscribe at any moment. Thank you in advance, and enjoy the rest of the video.
I used to work at a motel that everyone said was haunted. I must have been there for maybe 6 or 7 months, and I hadn't seen anything of the sort. Granted, I don't believe in any of that kind of stuff, so it's not like I was out there with my spookometer, but one night, I had a little run-in with someone that had me questioning my stance on the supernatural altogether. So at this particular motel, we had what was basically an on-site diner that was just across from the rooms, and everything is single-story. One afternoon, we were expecting 2 elderly sisters to check in for a few nights. These 2 sisters just so happened to be friends of the owners and fairly regular guests who came to stay on the owner's dime maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Only, I hadn't met them yet, so I had no idea what they looked like or anything. It was way past dark when they arrived, so while they're being greeted by the owner and their baggage is being unloaded by some of the other staff, I get the nod to head up to their room with a bottle of complimentary wine. So, I head to the bar in the on-site diner, grab a bottle of our best wine, 2 glasses and a tray, then head out of the back door of the diner and around to the back of the motel. This is a pretty crucial part of the story, as I'd been told the wine had to be a surprise. They'd never have accepted it otherwise, and the owner wanted a little showmanship for his friends, or more accurately, to make it look like he'd bothered to put some effort into it prior to their arrival. Either way, it meant that I didn't see the old ladies arrive, otherwise this story basically would never have happened. There's basically no one else around, and right after I put the wine into the motel room, I head out intending on scurrying away from the room so that the ladies don't catch me having planted their little gift. Only the opposite way I was due to head, I noticed one of the hallway lights was flickering. I swear to God, it was seriously like something out of a horror movie because I turned to look, and underneath the flickering light, wearing a long, flowing dress, is a headless figure.
Welcome, everybody, back to an episode of our Velocity Sellers podcast. I am your host, Velocity Pete. Today we have a episode that we like to film before these big events like Prime Day, like Black Friday. This one is specifically to Prime Day. We just got the big announcement, to start out the episode, that Prime Day this year is going to be 4 days long. It's going to be July 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th. So double the days, double the deals was their little tagline. We're going to get into this. We're going to get also into what you should be looking.
At this point, it's important to note something about this whole dumb story about the ghost haunting the motel. Legend has it that it was a hung woman whose body had gone undiscovered for so long that she'd rotted to the point where her neck basically tore apart from the rot and the strain. Therefore, it was a headless ghost that was haunting the motel. I know that's about the lamest ghost story you've ever heard of, right? But then imagine being me, seeing that headless figure standing under the flickering light, and you can imagine why my heart went from 0 to 60 as I looked at something that I had absolutely zero explanation for. I think I gasped so loud and so much that my lungs felt like they were about to burst, and that caused the figure in front of me to turn around. Okay, it wasn't a ghost, like I said. There's no such thing as ghosts or spirits or anything of that nature. But there is such a thing as osteoporosis. Osteoporosis is a condition that severely weakens the bones of people who suffer with it. And in older folks, it can mean that they end up with some pretty painful hunching postures, or in this old lady's case, bones so weak that she could barely support her own head. This meant that from behind, it basically looked like this poor old lady had no head at all. Anyway, she turns around, gives me this look as if she'd horribly been offended by my terrified gasp, and I'm forced to explain it away like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you, you startled me. She just frowns, points up at the light, and says something snarky like, better get that fixed, young man, then waddles off along the corridor. I felt like a total idiot. I seriously thought that I was looking at the very same ghost whose existence I've been denying for months on end. I can't even lie. It was one of the scariest and creepiest moments I think I've ever experienced.
So, I've been working as a janitor at the local high school for a few years now, and it's one of the most easiest jobs I've been on. It wasn't a big school, as the town it was in was relatively small, so I was the only janitor working the night shifts. Most of my duties would be to go from building to building, mopping floors and picking up trash. It was a chill job, but it could get a bit lonely from time to time. One night, I was called into work a bit later than usual as the other janitor stayed to make up extra hours he had requested. I took his spot once he had left, and pretty soon I was the only one in the building. It was a Monday night if I remember correctly, and I was doing my usual nightly routine of mopping the hallways when I hear the sound of a door slamming closed. My initial thought was that the door stopper I had placed to keep it open had somehow gotten moved, and I go over to see what it was. I could vaguely remember closing every door on this floor, so I was surprised that I had forgotten to close one. I go to the classroom where I heard the noise and peek my head inside, expecting to find the stopper on the floor. Sure enough, the door stopper was on the floor, and that's when I noticed something else by one of the metal cabinets. It only took me a good second to realize that there was a finger wrapped around it. Because of the angle, I didn't see who was hiding behind there, and I sure as hell didn't want to know. I locked the door and didn't spend another second in there, and practically ran outside the building calling security. When they showed up, I led them to the room where I saw the person hiding. However, by the time we got there, there was nobody inside and the window was left wide open. The whole ordeal didn't make any sense as we were on the 3rd floor, which was about 40 feet from the ground, so there was no way he would have survived a fall like that. The security guard gave me an annoyed type of look as if he didn't believe me. I explained what I saw to my girlfriend, but instead of believing me, she went on to lecture me about how I wasn't getting enough sleep. Looking back now, I don't blame her, but I know what I saw. A few days later, one of the janitors was working the night shift as I had called in sick that day. He was mopping the floors of the 2nd building when he found a dirty homeless man inside one of the storage closets. The man attacked him with a large butcher knife, causing a truckload of blood to spill. Thankfully, there was an officer on standby and must have heard the commotion from upstairs. Long story short, the cop chases the man and was obviously arrested. Thankfully, the other janitor had survived, but had to have several stitches done. I still don't know as to how the man had managed to get into school without being caught. School security was pretty strict about letting outsiders in unless it was a parent or something. I worked that job for another month after and never saw anything abnormal again. When I was about 19 or so, I got my first ever real job working at a gas station during the spring. It wasn't the best paying job, but it was enough to get my foot through the door to start making payments for college and stuff. I lived by myself in a small 1-bedroom apartment that my parents paid for, but got the job in the meantime to cover other expenses. My managers, being the jerks that they were, gave me a week of night shifts knowing I had a 7 a.m. class every morning. It was annoying to say the least, but I really needed the money. During the night shift, you'd have people constantly come in and out for gas, and right around the 10 p.m. mark, business would be slow for the most part. After that, you'd maybe have 1 or 2 shady people come in once an hour for a snack or cigarettes. That being said, it's still a pretty good time where I could chill for a few hours. One night, I was on my shift as usual and had just finished serving what I thought was the last customer for the night as I was about to end my shift. As I'm packing up and getting ready to leave, a car pulls up right in front of the store and a man gets out. He wore a stained white shirt and had a scruffy beard with messy hair. He walks right in and I greet him with a hello and asked if I could help him with anything. He completely ignores my question and walks over to the refrigerators and grabs a 6 beer. I live in the South, so people like this were very common around here. I tell him his total and he then says something that made my skin crawl. "Hey, you're really pretty. I love your hair." Laughing awkwardly, I tell him thanks and he proceeds to hand me a $10 bill, making sure our hands touched. I give him his change and tell him to have a good rest of his night and go on my phone, hoping he'd get the hint to leave me alone. He thankfully left and I waited for my coworker who was working after me to arrive so I could go home. However, he must have been running late because it was 10 minutes past his shift and I was getting a bit annoyed. 10 minutes turned into 20 and then eventually 30. As I was about to call him to see where he was, I then noticed someone hiding behind one of the gas pumps. It was a little hard to see, but because of the light, I could make it out to be the same man from earlier, I had no idea as to what he was doing, but I could tell that it clearly wasn't good. He then comes out from behind the pump, and I see that he's clearly hiding something behind his back, and I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I grabbed my keys and was headed out toward my car when I see him approach the front door, giving me this unsettling look. It was a look of hatred and fury. Suddenly he pulls out a gun and proceeds to show it to me as if he wanted me to know that he was armed. At this point, I'm frantically dialing 911 on my phone, and he then shoots the lock and steps inside yelling at me while having me at gunpoint. He orders me to give him all the money in the register or he won't hesitate to pull the trigger. I take a few deep breaths and calmly hand him the money we had, and he then takes off down the road. I call the police while bawling my eyes out in fear, and the operator tells me to stay on the line with her until an officer arrived. Thankfully, the guy never made it too far, as police had managed to track him down. Turns out, this guy was wanted for sexual assault and murder. His victims were 2 family members, one of them being his wife, 1 widower, and 2 gas station employees. Just like me. The next day, I quit my job at that gas station and now work at my local supermarket. So this happened a little over 2 years ago. It was late 2016 and I just started my new job at a motel. It was low pay, but I needed an office job as it was required for my training. One of my friends, Michael, got me this job. For a few days I did training with the owner in the mornings, and for 2 nights Michael trained me. Our job was the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. Nothing too exciting, just checking guests in and doing paperwork. My boss, who is the owner, went away with his wife on vacation for a week, which is attributed to the swift training I had to endure. So it was my first night alone on the night shift. There was a monitor with security cameras around the motel's property and large glass windows all around the office building with a glass door, and there was no night window like most motels have. It was fairly early in the night, at about 1 a.m. I was just doing my normal paperwork when a man walks in and asks if we have any rooms available. Usually if someone is sketchy, my boss has me lie and say no, but he seemed normal at the moment. However, we just had a meeting on customer satisfaction, and our boss was really encouraging us to be more polite to guests. Without hesitation, I said, yes, of course, just for one. So I begin creating the reservation on the computer when I notice he starts swatting in the air and making spitting noises, as if he were being surrounded by flies. I tried to ignore it, and as far as I was concerned, it wasn't my business, so I tried to check him into the room as quickly as possible. I give him his key and he's on his way. At this point in time, I could be described as very timid and had a lot going on in my personal life, so I hope you could all understand my reaction to what happens next. The man comes back from his room and slams his hand on the glass door and causes me to jump. Absolutely frightened, I look up to see him just staring at me. He cracks the door and puts his head through and says, "I can't get into my room. Why won't you let me into my room?" My only defense is trying to be helpful, so I replied with, maybe there's something wrong with your key. Here, let me give you another one." The look he had in his eyes was inexplicable. I felt like I was in absolute danger. I handed him his new key and he went back to his room. I tried texting Michael because he was the one who trained me. Though it was in the middle of the night and he was asleep, I needed some guidance. With no reply from Michael, I noticed the man trudging down the stairs to come back, and I go into absolute panic mode. I run into the back office and lock the door, and I pull out my pocket knife. It's important to keep protection when working at night. All the while, I hear the man in the office yelling, "Hello? Hello, why won't you let me into my room? Do you not like me? Me being an absolute idiot and not standing my ground and calling the police when I'm feeling scared, I decided to take the situation on alone. I reply with, I'm just on the phone, I'll be right out. I then start calling Michael over and over for help, but no answer. I decided to take a few deep breaths and then step out of the office. However, the man was not there, but rather in the bathroom. I start hearing him talking to himself saying, kill her, kill her, kill her. My heart sank. Still being an idiot and not calling the police, he comes out and I say, your key was broken. I'm sorry. Let me escort you to your room. He agrees, thankfully. I was wearing a long sleeve sweater, so with my arms down, I was able to hide my knife in my hand while holding it. I begin to walk outside and he seemed insistent to walk behind me. We begin making our way to the staircase and up towards his room. I was sweating from how nervous I was, cautiously looking behind me to make sure he wasn't going to make a move. He stops at a room, and I stop at his room a few doors down. I smile and I say, oh, that's the wrong room. This is your room. As it clearly said on the door. The whole time, he was going to someone else's room trying to open the door. I quickly ran back to the office and locked the door. The next guest I checked in was a police officer from a few towns away. I felt bad for him about the guy, but they seemed willing to keep an eye out and ear out. The next night, the man came back, but I had the doors locked and told him we were all booked up. I explained to my boss what happened when he got back from vacation. However, he didn't take me that seriously. I continued to work there on the night shift for the next year, where many other strange encounters happened. So, strange man, let's never meet again. If you ever feel uncomfortable, always call the police.
For a limited time, get any pizza with any toppings for just $9.99 online. Only at Domino's.
The following story occurred in the summer of 2005. I lived in Athens, Georgia, and attended the University of Georgia. At the time, my girlfriend, now wife, lived in Atlanta, which was about a 65-mile drive from my hometown. The highway which takes you to Atlanta from Athens is a 2-lane highway called 316. This is important information for the story. It was a Sunday evening. I had spent the weekend in Atlanta and was now driving back to Athens. In the summer, there are very few cars on the road on Sunday evenings, as many of the students go home for the summer. I was driving a black BMW SUV and was cruising along listening to music. I saw no cars for miles and was approaching a traffic light along 316. The traffic light was red, and I came to a stop alongside an old Mustang. It looked like one of those models from the 1980s, was black in color with a rag top. The windows of the vehicle were tinted. I didn't really give the car a second thought. I just sat there and waited for the light to turn green. When it did, the Mustang suddenly sped off with a squeal of the tires. As if the driver floored it from the idle position, the car sped off far in front of me. I was a bit surprised, but I just thought, another redneck, who cares? The Mustang was soon out of sight and out of mind. I continue driving along, and I'm back in chill mode again, when suddenly, a car with its high beams on appears directly behind me. What the hell? I quickly realized it was the same Mustang from before. They had been waiting alongside the highway for me. I nervously looked down to make sure my phone was still charging, just in case I needed it. It was. The Mustang switches lanes and flies up beside me, keeping pace for a few seconds. The driver then swerves in front of me, then suddenly brakes, bringing the car to a halt. I swerve into the other lane. The Mustang quickly speeds up beside me, and start swerving, trying to knock me off the road. They charge ahead again and try the same braking maneuver once more. At this point, I am freaking out. Now, I'm a 6'3", 220-pound male who works out all the time. I don't easily get scared. But in this situation, size did not matter. I note the license plate on the car and grab my phone. But as I do, the Mustang is suddenly beside me again and begins swerving. I jerk my wheel to the side, and my phone goes flying out of my hands into the passenger side door well. Shit! The Mustang is then behind me, flashing its brights, right on my bumper, speeding up, slowing down, blaring its horn, swerving from side to side. They suddenly take off and are soon out of sight. I take the opportunity to collect myself and drive the remaining 10 minutes to the turnoff road to Athens. I make a quick decision to drive to the police station to file a report. I had the license plate number memorized and had been reciting it over and over again. As I turn off the road to Athens, bright headlights fill my rearview mirror again, and the Mustang is behind me. It speeds past me, turns down another road, and is gone. I arrived at the police station and give them the license plate number. It's a fairly small station, and I think there was only one officer working. He tells me that it's probably somebody mistaking me for somebody else. He runs the plate number and tells me the owner of those tags is deceased. Holy shit. Now I'm really freaked out. I finish filing the report and head home. The story doesn't end there. Later that night, when I was on the phone with my girlfriend, someone outside beats loudly on my garage door several times. Before I could get out to see who it was, I heard a squeal of tires. I never saw a car, but I called the cops immediately, and there has never been any kind of follow-up. I didn't sleep for several nights after that. I'm 21 years old. This happened to me shortly after I turned 18 and graduated high school. My family moved to a new house in Texas. My mother claimed that it was so we could get a fresh start, but I knew the truth. She was ashamed of all the trouble that my sister Jocelyn had gotten into in our hometown. Weeks later, after we settled into the new house, Jocelyn disappeared. My mother received a phone call from my sister's parole officer. Apparently they found her in Atlanta. And to make a long story short, Jocelyn wasn't thrilled about the move, so she ran away to a friend's house. Unfortunately, I couldn't fly back to Georgia with my mom, and I had no choice but to stay in Texas. The next morning after my mom left, I went for a jog around the new neighborhood to familiarize myself. It was when I stopped to catch my breath and change playlists on my phone that I felt a cold feeling creep up my spine. It was the unmistakable sensation that you get when you're being watched. I looked around, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. But I knew that someone was watching me from somewhere close by. I decided to cut my walk short. As soon as I reached my house, I locked the doors and immediately ran upstairs to take a quick shower. While I was washing up, I heard a faint thud from downstairs. I quickly turned off the shower and listened. Another thud followed. I quickly threw on my clothes and ran downstairs to check things out, but there was nothing. The front and patio doors were locked, so I was left feeling a little confused. Trying my best to keep my composure, I was finally able to breathe when my mom called to check up on me. I didn't want my mom to be worried about me. She was already stressing out enough because of the situation with my sister, so I told her that I was fine and that I was going to order takeout and chill for the rest of the day. Later that night, around 10 p.m., I finished up my dinner while binge-watching How to Get Away with Murder on Netflix, and eventually fell asleep on the couch. I suddenly woke up a couple of hours later. It was around 1 a.m., and the room was freezing. The thermostat showed 42 degrees. That's when that dreadful feeling came back. I felt like a deer being eyeballed by an apex predator. Danger was close by. My stomach felt like I was doing somersaults. Something was very wrong, and that's when I noticed that my phone was missing. After a brief search on the couch, I couldn't find it. Annoyed, I decided to use a website called Text Now on my laptop. It's a free online service that I sometimes use to track my misplaced phone. Trembling, I typed in my number. Almost immediately, the ringtone abruptly stopped, and that's when I heard heavy breathing coming from the other end. I barely had enough time to respond when I heard a knocking on the glass of the patio doors. I grabbed an unscrewed bedpost from the closet before checking things out. When I looked out through the doors, my heart stopped. Holding my phone was a dark figure in a goat mask. Before I can make out any other details, the masked man slid my patio door open. At the speed of light, I burst through the front doors and headed for my neighbor's house across the street. There, I banged on the door until an older woman came to greet me. She immediately called the police after I explained everything to her. The cops arrived 10 minutes later, and after a thorough search of my house, they found no trace of the intruder. After that ordeal, there was no way I was staying in that house alone, so I asked the officers if I could accompany them to the station, to which they obliged. While I was at the station, one of the officers informed me that they had located my phone outside the house. However, since there were no fingerprints on it, added to the fact that I couldn't give a detailed description of the assailant, it was a dead end. There was one last unpleasant surprise when I unlocked my phone to call my mom. Upon seeing what was in my photo gallery, my blood ran cold. The officer saw that I was uneasy and asked me what was wrong. I handed him the phone. There was about 15 videos of me sleeping on the couch, each nearly 3 minutes long. The masked man that I saw had been inside my house and was watching me while I was sleeping. I felt so violated that I became nauseous and called my mom and told her everything. Hours later, she and my sister came straight from the airport to come get me. We didn't live in that house much longer after that. For the longest time, I couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened if I had woken up with that man standing over me. Perhaps I wouldn't be here to tell you this story. It took a while, but I finally came to terms with what happened. But I would be lying if I told you that this experience doesn't haunt me to this day. This story took place during my early childhood, so I'll share events that I can recall. It's mostly bits and pieces. There are some things that I can remember in great detail, and some that I can only vaguely recall. So I'll do my best to try to piece things together without getting off track. I have 2 sisters. I'm the middle child. They also remember a good majority of this as well. This happened back in mid-2003. I was 5 years old back then. My 2 sisters were about 4 and 7, so my parents hired a babysitter. Her name was Julie. She had been friends with my mom in high school. She actually lived with us for a while. All I really remember about her was that she was very tall, skinny, and had dark blonde hair that was always tied up. We lived in an apartment complex at the time. It was a place called Oats Creek. So Julie babysat us while my parents worked. She even ended up dating one of my dad's co-workers, which brought a few jokes at my dad's job about him being a pimp. Basically, she became a family friend. Not long after that is when Julie started to change. She started getting very impatient and rude, and even straight up abusive to us, mostly targeting my sisters. My older sister once told me that she thinks that Julie possibly tried to kill her, and in response she grabbed a bottle with green liquid inside of it and tried to force her to drink it. She didn't know what this substance was, and she couldn't get into great detail about the incident itself. I guess her memory isn't as good as mine. Julie would get physically violent with us over the stupidest reasons, such as accidentally knocking something over or spilling a drink. We were just kids. Of course, she only did this when my parents were at work. That was until our family cat attacked her. Julie closed the door with my little sister's hand still in the doorway. It was an accident. Or at least I think it was. This, of course, hurt my little sister, who started crying in pain. That's when our cat jumped onto Julie's leg and latched on with her back claws. She was biting and swatting at her, with her tail puffed out, hissing and everything. Basically, she snapped. My parents were a bit surprised, as our cat wouldn't even hurt a fly. It was around this time that they started to suspect that Julie was a bit of a whack job. She still continued to watch after us while my parents worked. This is where my memory gets a little hazy, as if my mind is trying to block something out. There was one occurrence that I still remember to this day, 18 years after the fact. In our room, my older sister had her own twin-sized bed. Me and my little sister shared a bunk bed on the other side of the room, and I slept on the top bunk. Anyway, one night, my little sister woke me up because she couldn't sleep. So she climbed up on the top bunk and we started talking quietly. After a while, she said, "Hey, watch this. I can hang off the edge without falling." However, she slipped and fell to the ground and started screaming and crying. That's when Julie storms into the room, yelling and cursing, and spanked my sister with one of my dad's belts. She then picks her up and throws her onto the bottom bunk, and screams for her to go back to sleep, and then storms out, slamming the door behind her. Julie was so enraged that she didn't even see me watching her. I was frozen, completely in shock. I didn't know what to do. I can only remember one time clearly where Julie physically struck me. As I said earlier, she mainly went after my two sisters. I can't remember the exact details, and she smacked me across the face. I don't remember why I did it, probably because she was yelling at us about something stupid, which was usual. She told my parents, and then my dad asked her, "Well, what did you do to set him off?" She then got pissy with him and said, "He was just a disrespectful little sh." Eventually, not long after that, Julie went away for good, moved on elsewhere. When she was finally gone, that's when me and my sisters came clean to my parents about everything. Julie struck us several times and yelled at us constantly. My parents can't really remember most of these events, as their memories aren't that great either. But I'm pretty sure they felt absolutely terrible for us, having to go through all of this. We never saw or heard from Julie again. I don't know if my parents ever confronted her about anything, but they definitely cut her out of our lives for good. They never contacted the police as there wasn't really any proof of abuse. Everything was all hearsay. Neither of my parents ever caught her actually doing anything. I wish they would have. I'm not sure why my sisters or myself never said anything sooner, like when Julie wasn't around. I'm pretty sure she made threats to us if we did, and perhaps we can't remember. Years later, we found out that Julie had been arrested and served time in jail. Unfortunately, we never found out the exact reason why. Sometimes we all still talk about these events, and I know that I'll remember this for the rest of my life. So yeah, that's my abuse babysitter story. Julie, burn in hell. This happened during my junior year of college. For context, I'm a 22-year-old female. I was driving from my hometown in the Chicago suburbs to the University of Missouri, which is about a 6-hour drive. I made this drive about every 4 to 6 weeks to see my family and my long-distance boyfriend. There were two main ways to take to the town that my university was in: stay on the interstate system throughout central Illinois and St. Louis, or branch out on back roads after Springfield, Illinois, until picking the interstate back up about 30 minutes from my college. I usually took the back road simply because it kept me awake with the constant speed limit changes and the occasional towns that I would have to go through. But on this particular time, I took the interstate system all the way there because there was high potential for winter weather. So I was minding my own business, listening to one true crime podcast after another, when about an hour from my exit, Traffic came to a standstill. Great, I thought. It was already way beyond dark at this point. It was also a Sunday night, and I just wanted to get home to catch a decent night's sleep before my Monday classes. After a while, emergency vehicles flew past the traffic on the shoulder, indicating that there must be some kind of accident up ahead. After what felt like forever, traffic slowly started crawling again, and eventually picked up pace as soon as we all passed the accident. That's when it started. I will admit that I do like to drive fast on the interstate, especially on this particular drive. What college kid doesn't? I was in the right lane with a decent amount of space between me and the car in front of me, and that's when I noticed someone right on my bumper. Seriously? I muttered out loud. Traffic was no longer super heavy, and the person could easily pass me in the left lane. Suddenly the car began flashing their brights at me and honking. I was extremely confused. I turned off my podcast and kept a close eye in my rearview mirror. The person continued to flash their lights, half blinding me in the darkness, flooring it to the left lane. I maneuvered around a few cars, attempting to get away from whatever issue this person had. Except they followed my every move. Now, being a female in my early 20s, I began to feel sick to my stomach, and I listened to enough true crime and general horror stories to just be the right amount of paranoid. I had read on social media recently about girls from my school encountering sex traffickers in my town and along the interstate that runs through it. One of the town's papers had even ran a series of stories regarding multiple sex and human trafficking rings used around this interstate for capturing victims, because it basically runs the length of the entire country. I shook the disturbing thought out of my head and continued doing about 85 miles per hour in the right lane, unless I had to go around someone. The car continued to follow me, flashing its lights and barely letting themselves ever get more than a few cars behind. I finally took the exit to my university and looked back, and the car was still behind me. It seemed as though that this person was trying to get me to pull over. Is there something wrong with my car that I just can't see? I wondered silently. There was no way in hell I would be pulling over on the side of an interstate in the middle of a dark, rainy night. That's exactly how urban legends or teenage slasher movies start out. At this point, I had no idea what to do. Looking back, I really should have drove straight to the local police station, but I was too flustered and scared to even think straight. I tried to think back on the last hour or so of my drive. Had I cut anyone off? I don't think so. I'm a relatively good driver, and I tend to mind my own business on the road, not engaging in any road rage or anything stupid like that. So I stupidly began driving to my apartment. The car continued to follow, still flashing their lights every so often, but no longer honking. They continued to stay glued to my bumper, and that's when I started to panic. What if they followed me all the way home? What the hell should I do? Call the police and send them on some wild goose chase to look for me in this car while I'm driving around town? As I approached another small exit off of a local highway onto a smaller street that ran past campus and toward my apartment, I had an idea. As I got closer to my exit, I did not get in the far right lane to turn off. At the very last second, I jerked the wheel and careened across the gravel shoulder so close to the grass that I barely missed driving off the road. As I gunned down the exit ramp, I glanced up at the overpass. The car had come to a screeching halt and was honking its horn manically. I broke down in tears for the rest of the way home, calling my boyfriend and explaining what had just happened. I never got a good enough look at the car to get a license plate number, or even really a good description of the vehicle, so I never reported the incident to the police. I have no idea what exactly was happening that night. My best guess is that whoever this person was, they saw me when traffic was stopped on the interstate, waiting for the emergency vehicles to clear the scene. It's very clear from the stickers that I have on my car, one being my university's name, and one that says Dog Mom. that it was likely that I was a college-aged female. All this person had to do was end up next to me to see that I was a female driving alone on the interstate in the middle of the night and have just the wrong intentions. When I was in high school, I lived in a very small town in Texas. It was the kind of place where everyone was either related to each other or hated each other. I had no family there, so yeah. I did have a pretty blonde girlfriend, and was pretty hated for that too. Nothing major, just some petty harassment and occasional fighting. But at the time, things had been escalating. So that's why on Valentine's Day, my girlfriend and I decided to skip the school dance and just stay in and watch a movie at her house while her parents went out. It was just better to avoid any kind of trouble. We borrowed her dad's car, a little Honda hatchback, and went into town. We stopped at the video store, and afterwards we went to Dairy Queen and headed back to her house. Now, she lived in the boonies. It was out in the middle of the forest, along a lonely road, with no streetlights. We were chatting and eating our blizzards, when all of a sudden a car comes up behind us. No big deal. It became a big deal when the headlights flooded the interior of our car, and I saw a pair of hands on the back seat, and the top of someone's head peering up from the hatchback. The lights had illuminated somebody hiding in the back of our car. As soon as the lights hit, the head and hands retreated back down. A solid chill ran through the entire length of my body. I slowly reached down and pulled out my pocket knife. It was the only thing I had. My girlfriend saw me and asked what was wrong. I then responded, "Nothing. I just had to stop at my friend's house real quick." She knew that was bullshit. I didn't have any friends. I pulled over at the next house that came up and jumped out of the car, yelling at her to do the same. She jumped out in total confusion. I flipped the driver's seat forward and lunged into the back seat in full maniac mode. The intruder popped up like a jack-in-a-box with empty hands waving. Hey, relax. What are y'all up to tonight?" It was some weird kid from our high school who we had never spoken to before, ever. "What in the holy f*** are you doing in our car? I thought you guys were going to the dance." "I was just hitching a ride." We sat there staring at him with our mouths open, wondering what to do. He tried to act real cool, and obviously we were in the middle of nowhere in some random person's driveway. We ended up driving him to the dance and dropping him off. The whole time he was telling us to come inside with him. Yeah, not happening. We dropped his ass off and sped out of there as fast as we could. When we got back to my girlfriend's house, she began crying and was shaking. She was completely freaked out. I still have no idea what he was planning on doing when the lights caught him crawling out of the hatchback. This happened a very long time ago, and thinking about it now still creeps me out. I lived in Adair County, Kentucky on a horse farm. One summer day about 5 or 6 years ago, my mother, who's the horse enthusiast in our family, found a new horse she wanted to purchase in Lawrenceburg. We'll refer to the seller of this horse as James. Lawrenceburg is one of several places throughout Kentucky where people have claimed to have seen Kentucky's version of Bigfoot, the hillbilly beast, which has been sighted all over the state of Kentucky. My brother and I were suckers for that kind of thing, like most kids are. We decided to tag along with my mother, hoping that we would see it ourselves. When we arrived in town, James's house was located on the outskirts, miles from anywhere. Only a few houses were dotted here and there on the sides of the road, but there was one in particular I will never forget. We were about 5 minutes away from James's house and going slow because we had a trailer hooked to the back of our 4Runner. I was staring out the window, hoping to see the hillbilly beast hiding somewhere in the woods, when I saw a house. This house had well over 20 mannequins throughout their yard, all shapes and sizes. Most were lying down or propped against what looked like a shed, but there were two among them that really freaked me out. One was an adult female tied to a tree right next to the road, so close I could probably touch it if I rolled down the window and stuck my hand out. The second was the size of a baby. It was nailed to a tree only a couple yards away. Both of them looked really old and worn out, molding, rotting, etc. My mom stopped the vehicle, and we were all just sitting there staring at this place. The house was old and run down, but obviously someone still lived there. The shed that was right next to it appeared almost brand new, minus what looked like satanic graffiti written all over it. The three of us were totally freaked out. We drove away, heading toward James's house. Once we got there, we asked him about the freaky mannequin place down the road. James claimed that he never saw anything like that. He also said that he was just in town that morning and took that exact road, so it's likely he would have seen it. Once we left with the new horse, we took a different way home, so we didn't have to look at the mannequin house again. Part of me thinks this could have been some freaky prank, but another part of me wonders, what if some of them weren't actually mannequins?
Skip the rental counter with Turo. Rent just about any car, just about anywhere.
I love to adventure. I've been to almost all 50 states. I've seen my fair share of diversity within nature and people. My main reason for travel is to explore the wilderness. Sometimes I will backpack in the Rocky Mountains, drive through national parks, and then drive through the desert. Growing up on the East Coast, I didn't get to experience the desert much, so I tend to favor the desert drive over the mountainous drive. I've been doing this for a couple of years now, and I haven't experienced anything too odd in the desert, other than the sheer feeling of loneliness. My favorite time to drive through the desert is at night, because the stars majestically illuminate the terrain. About a month ago, however, I saw more than just sand and stars on this particular drive. I was driving through the desert in Arizona. Nightfall was closing in on me, which was one of the best times. The sunset across the desert brought me to a whole new place. Sometimes I would even camp out in my car, because in a sense, I loved how alone I was out there. Normally I would bring my dog with me, but my parents were in town, so I was all alone this time. Again, with nightfall approaching, I didn't know whether I should camp out or keep driving home. I figured my parents would want to see me, and I was only about an hour from the house, so I continued through the quickly darkening desert. If any of you have ever been through the desert in Arizona, you would know that you occasionally see horses and other animals along the side of the road. So seeing figures on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere isn't anything out of the ordinary. About 45 minutes from my house, my high beams pick up on a different figure. It looked like a person. Being the generous person that I am, I pulled over to see if anything was wrong. As I approached, I noticed the person wasn't moving at all. They were just sitting upright. They didn't seem to notice that I was even there. His head never turned. "Are you okay?" There was no answer. No acknowledgement that I had said anything. The man was poorly dressed, rather pale, but surprisingly clean-shaven. He was oddly skinny though, and the more I focused on him, the more I realized how abnormally skinny he was. "I, was driving by and noticed you. I wanted to make sure that you were okay." Still nothing. He was staring straight at the ground. I sat there awkwardly for a couple of seconds. until I finally saw his jaw move.
I need some water.
His voice was deep. It didn't sound like a person. I can't quite explain it, but his voice just sounded off. Okay, man, let me grab you some out of my car. I walked to the passenger door and reached for my bottle of water. Before I could even reach it, though, I just sensed that something was off. I jolted my head where the man was sitting. He was gone. I was now panicking. I didn't know where he went to. I closed the passenger door and took a quick look around. I heard movement from behind a rock about 10 to 20 feet off the road. A man came out from behind the rock, but it was not the same man. This guy looked absolutely nuts, and he was holding something in his hand. He started running towards me. I then jumped into my car and took off down the road. As I looked into my rearview mirror, I realized that there was more of them, maybe 5 or 6, all emerging from behind the rocks right off the road. They were all staring at me as I sped off. I had no intention of slowing down. In fact, I would have been happy if I got pulled over by a cop. Within 3 to 4 minutes of that happening, I felt relaxed enough to play some music. I took one last glance into my rearview mirror. My blood then turned to ice. I was in complete shock when I saw the man who I had offered the water to sitting in my back seat, just staring at me. His eyes. They weren't looking at me. They were looking into me. I, of course, then slammed on my brakes, still in too much shock to make any noise. I couldn't take my eyes off of him. He then started to smile. The look of death was on his face.
Soon, you will be one of us,
he stated as he lifted up his knife. I jolted out of my car, and as soon as I did, I could hear my back door opening up. This man was very fast, inhumanly fast, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to outrun him for long.
Are you ready?
The deep voice said as he quickly approached me. It was now completely dark out. I had no clue where to go. It was over, or so I thought. There were headlights approaching us. At this point, I was a couple 100 feet from my car. I didn't hear the man behind me anymore. I waved down the car that was approaching me. Thank God the driver saw me and stopped. After explaining to the man what happened, he tried calling the police, but sadly, there was no signal. His name was Mark, and he agreed to follow me home just in case anything else happened. He also had a pistol on him, which really made me feel safe. After about 35 minutes of driving with Mark behind me the whole way, I finally made it back home. After thanking him, I went to go check the back seat of the car to see if my stuff was still there, or if the man had left anything. Luckily, everything was still there. I did, however, notice a sheet of paper on the top of my backpack. I took it and opened it up.
You aren't safe. You will soon be one of us.
The note read. A chill ran through my body. I was startled by the sound of footsteps in front of my car and jolted up. The dog threw up, my mom said, standing right in front of my car. I went back inside. I didn't say anything to my parents. They probably wouldn't have believed me anyway. I figured that I would call the police and let them know what happened after they left. Oh yeah, some guy stopped by looking for you about 20 minutes ago. Who? I asked. I don't know, it was some skinny guy with a really deep voice. He didn't talk much, but he did give me this letter to give to you, so here. But try to find more normal friends, please. My heart was racing. As soon as my parents left, I opened it.
We know where you live,
the letter read. My heart sank. After calling the cops and explaining everything, they investigated it for a while, but sadly, they found no sign of people along the section of road I was on. I gave them the letter for DNA testing, but I still haven't heard anything back. I installed a security system to my house and haven't had any problems since, and I hope to God it stays that way. There is a single stretch of I-70 in Utah between Salina and Green River. Over 100 miles with no services, no hotels, no restaurants or gas stations of any kind. There are only some viewing areas where you can pull off the road. It's a hell of a drive, and don't get me wrong, those Utah mountains are stunning in the daytime.